Chapter 1600. As soon as he said this, the dragon aspects were all stunned. Orgarin has actually already set off, but in order to delay his arrival, I sent him the wrong coordinates in the name of Loken's last words. It's a hidden black hole, and even he won't be able to come out so easily. This way, he'll arrive at Azeroth a little later. Even so, I estimate that we can only buy about an extra month or so. The worst-case scenario is a week. When Orgarin comes out, he'll definitely realize that something is wrong. He'll retrieve the star map of the universe from 25,000 years ago and find the correct coordinates of Azeroth. Our task is very heavy. Not only do we have to attack Yogg-Saron as soon as possible and restore order in Order, but we also have to stop Orgarin before the Omega destruction signal is transmitted. Otherwise, the Titan will come to Azeroth again and destroy all civilizations and creatures, including us incompetent guardians. This time, no one was optimistic. No one doubted the power of the Titan of the Pantheon. As the creator of the Guardians and Dragon aspects, when the Titan created them, not only did he imprint absolute obedience in their souls, but he also hid a self-destruction code or something. To destroy them, it would only take a single thought. Even if they fell like Loken and had their self-destruction code removed by the ancient gods, it would be useless. The combat power of the Titan was absolute. Didn't they see how happy the ancient gods of Azeroth were back then? Didn't the Titan get beaten like dogs when they arrived? As soon as Torim said this, the atmosphere became gloomy and gloomy. The dragon aspects looked at each other and suddenly realized that they could only rely on the power of mortals this time. Nozdormu and Isra had to watch over their respective territories. They could leave for a short period of time, but they couldn't fight for a long time. Alexstrasza and her Red Dragon army were essentially fighting against Arthas' Scourge army and couldn't leave. Of course, it could be said that she was helping the Alliance fight against the Scourge army. The problem was that Arthas was causing trouble, and the first to suffer was the Dragonbone Waste where the dragon race's nest was located. Although they had a grudge with the Second Fool before, the Alliance came to help from across the ocean. If the Alliance really went back on their word, the first to suffer would be Dragon Sleep God Palace. Kleos. All right then, although he was announced as the new Blue Dragon King and a Magic Guardian Dragon, no one had high hopes for his combat strength. Onyxia will follow you to Orger. Speaking of which, the Dragon Slumber Holy Temple had sent out a whole big circle, and it was still Onyxia who the F***ck she was. The Black Dragon Princess was sent by Duque to help the Dragon Slumber Shrine. In the end, the Red Dragon Sister was embarrassed. Duque, the Sleeping Dragon Temple owes you another favor. When the time comes, we won't go back on our words. Duque chuckled at Big Sis Red Dragon's words. Treat it as a fart. What a joke. Forget it. If I hadn't saved you back then, you would still be working like a slave for the Beastmen. Duque didn't say anything. That was what his eyes said, and the Red Dragon Sister really understood what he meant. She whimpered like a small animal. The two veteran dragon aspects rolled their eyes at the same time. You're a disgrace to us dragons. Things were basically settled like that. Duque returned to the Alliance and made arrangements at the Throne Conference. The Western Front would be guarded by Muradin and Kurdran, and the Eastern Front would be guarded by William's team of 3. Apart from that, almost all the Alliance's powerhouses would be transferred to attack Orger. Magni loudly muttered, "All right. Dragons, Titan Guardians, Ancient Gods, Lich Kings, almost all the troublemakers that can be imagined have come to Northrend. The Alliance might as well change its name to Salvation Alliance." William spread his hands. When have we not saved the world? The radiant Queen Sylvanas lightly tapped the table with her knuckles. Rejoice, at least there's no burning legion at this time. Queen Sylvanas' words made sense, and the Dwarf King could only shrug and raise the wine glass in his hand. All right, let's toast to kill Leiden, whose but was stuck in the Sunwell portal and died. Very naturally, only the group of rowdy dwarves raised their glasses with him, and the other leaders just smiled. No matter how anxious they were, the necessary preparations still had to be done. Because of Loken's early death, the entire defense system of Orger had been activated without Yogg-Saron even needing to stir up trouble. Before entering the core area of Orger, they had to pass through the city wall area. Although Duque himself knew what was inside, he didn't have the excuse of being a spy of the Burning Legion this time, so he couldn't lie and say that he knew all the secrets of the Titans. Hence, with the explanation of the new guide, Torim, the Alliance knew what was in the city wall area. First was the absolute forbidden spell formation. To be precise, it was the Titan runic spell formation that prohibited flying objects. Anything that was more than 100 meters above the ground would be instantly destroyed by the spell formation. This eliminated the possibility of using the flying battleships to flatten the area. Secondly, before seeing the first boss at the door, the blazing behemoth, they had to fight a medium-sized local battle. This was because from the moment they entered the door, thousands of guards would rush out to meet the invaders, like Duque. From the E-cast steel defender, which was the size of a human and looked like a dwarf made of steel, but was actually powered by low-level Titan runes, to the rune-etched statue, which was a 2-story tall iron rail puppet, to the mechanical gnome battle tank, which looked like a spider, and to the messy, mechanical attack plane 54A, that looked like a helicopter. Anyway, there was a bunch of lifeless mechanical guards that had enough energy to almost perpetual motion blocking the way. If they didn't dismantle all these guys into scrap metal, they wouldn't be able to enter Orger. As a last resort, Duque had Magni prepare a batch of specially modified tanks. These were super tanks that were based on the main battle tanks of the Iron Furnace Castle, with Torim providing the materials, and Duque's newly developed, secretly learned, Titan runes to strengthen them. Only such a tank could easily destroy the guards left behind by the Titans. As for the modifications, that was the job of the great gnome craftsman, Gerben. He and Magni would naturally lead the dwarves and gnome craftsmen from the Iron Furnace Castle to work overtime day and night to complete the modifications. During this period of time, Duque was basically focused on studying the Titan runes left behind by Maligos in Karazhan. Suddenly, one night there was a knock on the door. After sensing for a while, Duque said, "Come in." It was Onyxia who came in. Unexpectedly, Onyxia came in wearing a Christmas princess outfit. Cosplay? Chapter 1601. Duque was dumbfounded. Damn, there was still a long time before Christmas. The black dragon, who had transformed into Countess Katrana, was practically fully armed. A red victorious battle suit, suspenders, and a red and white Christmas hat. As long as Santa Claus was male, he wouldn't be able to resist. "What are you doing, princess?" Duke was never one to reject his family's sugar-coated bullets or sugar-coated bombs. After Duque's godly sword went through a simple explanation of the dragon's lair, this silly female dragon finally revealed the truth of the matter. She consciously lowered her posture and forced an awkward smile onto her face. "Will we be punished by the Titans?" Duque laughed so hard that his 8-pack abs could be seen. After all this time, it turned out that this female dragon was still afraid of death. Duque pressed the dragon's head down. "Don't talk, savor it carefully." Onyxia rolled her eyes at Duque, but still did as she was told. Only when he was comfortable as the host was he willing to reveal some useful information. According to Valen's testimony, 25,000 years ago, Sargeras, a member of the Titans, betrayed the Pantheon and dealt a heavy blow to the Pantheon. Then he roped in the 2 giants of Eridar, Kil, Jaden and Archimont. Only then did the Burning Crusade begin. Thousands of planets fell and turned into a sea of fire. Onyxia listened quietly, not slacking off in her work. There's no doubt that the Titans are powerful. Even after 25,000 years, the protective spell formation left by the Titans is still protecting Azeroth from the Burning Legion's direct attacks. Then let's make a hypothesis. If the Titans are fine, why don't they go and find trouble with the Burning Legion? When Duque said this, Onyxia's eyes lit up. As smart as she was, she quickly thought of the crux of the matter. That's right. The Titans can't do it. The heavy blowback then was absolutely devastating. Otherwise, they would have been beaten by Sargeras to hide in some subspace and seal themselves. In any case, they would definitely be in a state of immobility. Otherwise, the Burning Legion wouldn't be so unscrupulous. Onyxia's eyes lit up and then dimmed again. Don't worry too much. The Titan's disappearance wasn't necessarily a good thing, nor was it a bad thing. As the strongest race in the universe, even if the Titans died, it was impossible for them to be completely wiped out. Think about it, the creations they left behind were still functioning normally after 25,000 years. Wasn't that proof of their greatness? If the Burning Legion really revives once more, then the Titans will definitely stand against the Legion in a certain way at a critical moment. Duque gently caressed the back of Onyxia's neck. For dragons, even in human form, that was undoubtedly where their reverse scale was. But for a dragon who had lost her will and only wanted to seek refuge at this moment, it was just a proof of her loyalty to Duke and tame him. As she breathed, Onyxia let out a sound similar to that of a satisfied cat. Duque encouraged her, "Don't worry too much. Just based on my achievement of sending Sardra's soul into the bottomless abyss, even if the Titans were to jump out again, they would only reward me and not blame me. The planet is no different from a pebble on the roadside to the Titans. As long as I can deal with Sardra's, I can ask them for the entire planet Azeroth as my possession. It's just a matter of a word. So, Onyxia, you're destined to be my possession." Being declared so domineeringly that she was his possession, Onyxia wasn't angry. Instead, her whole body trembled, and an expression of joy appeared on her face. Duque took the opportunity to move his sword directly with his mind, and released a continuous stream of arcane impact with the divine sword. He almost made Onyxia roll her eyes. Well, damn it, why can't I look directly at the words, Dragonmaw Clan, in the future? Speaking of which, Duque's words were actually 70% true and 30% false. As a transmigrator, how could he not know that the Titans had already typed GG in the battle with Sardra's 25,000 years ago while cursing at Sardra's entire family? But a creation Titan was a creation Titan. You're still a creation Titan after 25,000 years. Since a half-baked demigod like Duque had the theoretical possibility of unlimited resurrection. How could the Titans not have a way out? The Titans did die, but that was in the physical sense. The problem was that their souls were still there. Apart from being unable to jump out and fight Sardra's head-on, the Titans' magical powers were still beyond the reach of the natives of Azeroth. That was why in the original battle with the Burning Legion in history, the Titans in their soul form jumped out to play the god weapon distribution, in order to maximize the strengthening of the people of Azeroth and fight against the Legion. Naturally, Duque wouldn't reveal too much about what happened in history. In any case, it was enough for Onyxia to understand that only by following him could Duque have a way out. To control this fellow who had a lot of ideas, it was necessary to stimulate him from time to time and maintain a sense of urgency. Perhaps this was the so-called way of dragon mastery. A week was a necessary time to attack Otter. It couldn't be helped. In addition to a large number of guards, there was also a strange restriction in the city wall area of Otter. It was something similar to planet Azeroth's protective array formation, except that it prohibited demigods and above from entering through the front door. It was the same teleportation portal that led to Otter's independent space. Existences below demigod level would be sent to the city wall area, while powerhouses above demigod level would be directly sent to the Guardian Temple area. Why can't we directly break into the Guardian Temple area with demigod level combat power? Torim, don't you have a shortcut to the inside? Duque had asked such a question before. Torim replied, yes, but that way, we won't be able to save the rest of the Guardians. Loken's death has already alarmed Yogg-Saron. According to his habits, when we enter, we will probably be directly teleported to the Stairway of Madness where Yogg-Saron is. At that time, we will face the siege of Yogg-Saron and his direct subordinates, as well as the 3 Guardians. On the contrary, if it's a powerhouse in the realm of ordinary heroes attacking, Yogg-Saron will ignore it and let Otter's defense system operate? Torim said with certainty, yes, so the best time for us to join the battle is to wait until the mortal powerhouses defeat my colleagues and restore them to normal. Duque rubbed his eyebrows. After fighting for so long, he finally felt a little lonely at the top. King against king, general against general. It was not good for Duque to participate in low-level battles. Firstly, it would be a waste of combat power, and secondly, it would deprive his partners of the opportunity to advance. Duque didn't know how many people had the opportunity to advance to demigod level, but every advancement must be a powerhouse who had been honed through trials of blood and fire. He had no reason to take away their opportunity. Chapter 1602. When Duque announced at the Alliance throne meeting that he would not personally participate in the battle before Otter's Stairway of Madness, and asked Torim to explain himself, the leaders of the Alliance revealed complicated expressions. In the past, even when Duque ascended to become a demigod, everyone still did not feel that it was real. After all, it seemed that Duque had not changed much. He was still in charge of the Alliance, maintaining the internal and logistical operations with the momentum of one man against 1,000. 1,000 internal officials could not compare to one Duque. This was already an iron law. While advancing to a demigod, Duque did not forget the development of the Alliance. He was still the beacon that guided the development of technology and civilization. Originally, the atmosphere was not bad, but with the birth of the second demigod in the Alliance, things seemed to have changed. Servana's apotheosis was more like an invisible stimulus that stimulated everyone to pursue higher realms and greater power. Otherwise, they would be pulled down. Duque indeed said, "Everyone, work hard. I hope that in 10 years, most of you here will be able to become demigods. The Burning Legion will make a comeback in 10 years at most. When that time comes, it is very likely that we will have to face the big three of the Legion at their peak, as well as the various Void Lords." That's right, because of the existence of the Planetary Protection Array. Even if the demons of the Burning Legion could forcefully descend, their strength would be greatly reduced. Everyone could kill the Void Lords that were reduced to dogs, but they might not be able to kill the original. This was because when the demons' health, strength, magic, and other indicators were several times stronger than before, their strength was no longer increased by a few times, but by dozens of times in minutes. Without enough peerless powerhouses, they could not even withstand the prelude of the Legion's return. When all the fields were destroyed, the mountains and rivers were polluted, and there was a lack of sources of food and drinking water, how long could the lonely main cities hold on? Nethario died, and so did Maligos. Onyxia and Calegos, who had replaced them, could only match up to the power of one of the original dragon aspects. In fact, they might even be far from being as good as, in the most ideal situation, the Planetary Defense Array would only have 80% of its power left. The Burning Legion's determination to destroy Azeroth, coupled with the fact that they did not know how to prevent the civil war between the Bronze Dragons, Duque could foresee that with the fall of Nozdormu in the future, the defense circle of the planet would be further weakened. When the barrier was no longer a barrier, he could only rely on these mortal experts in front of him. 2 fists were no match for 4 hands. No matter how strong Duque was individually, it was impossible for him to fend off all the demons. It was no exaggeration to say that whether or not these people could become demigods would determine the fate of the entire Azeroth. This was the reason why Duque had to let them train. Everyone had a fire burning in their hearts, and they were secretly suppressing it. No matter if it was for his own people, for his own country, for the Alliance, or even for this world, he had to become a demigod. Those below the level of demigod are ants. Then, on the day of the expedition, after entering Alder, the atmosphere suddenly changed. "Wait, Duque, didn't you say you weren't coming?" Everyone was shocked to see Duque sitting on a tank with a huge cannon barrel. Duke Marcus said he wasn't coming, but that doesn't mean Mark Dooku isn't coming. Duque was seriously farting. Sophistry. Shameless. Pervert. Seconded. A group of Alliance experts jeered. F*CKU, didn't you say you would let us go alone? We've done so much mental preparation and mental struggle. You're actually here again. Facing the bombardment, no matter how shameless Duque was, he could only admit defeat. I'm only going to fight the first stage. I'll run after killing the flaming beasts. Why? Sally Whitemane asked. Unknowingly, Duque had his arms around Magni, Bulang, Jurbin, and a few other dwarves. They looked like they were tap dancing, and they smiled incomprehensibly. giant ships and cannons, this is a man's romance. Duque pointed into the distance. Look, it's more advanced than us, but it's from an ancient civilization. Brothers, do you see that? Magni raised his hand to cover his forehead. He stood on his tiptoes and looked into the distance. I see it, it's the crystallization of technology that transcends time. Lang jumped onto his big brother's shoulder and waved his fist excitedly. I see it, it's an even more awesome cannon. Jurban jumped onto Lang's shoulder, and the three dwarves started building a human ladder. He waved his wrench. I see it, it's the call of the future. The group of Alliance experts was speechless. They looked like they were saying, "You're all dirty. I can't stand you technological maniacs." Generally speaking, there were three types of vehicles modified with Titan runes. The first was the Mammoth tank, which focused on defense. Not only did it have 3 layers of armor, but it also used the wreckage of the Burning Legion's interstellar battleship floating in the Azeroth Void battlefield. They broke off the relatively intact armor and had the help of the dragons. It took them a long time to cut it out. It was equipped with 4 105mm howitzers with various beginner-level Titan rune shells. A round of shots would definitely make the enemy wish they were dead. The second type was the Katyusha self-propelled rocket launcher, which focused on long-range firepower. Other than the insane pseudo-missile system, there was also the human cannon, which was specially used to knock people out, to deal with the boss Flame Behemoth. The third type was the Harley motorcycle that Duque and the other dwarves were riding. Duque, who had transformed into Mark Dooku, stretched out his right middle finger and pushed against the large sunglasses in front of his eyes. He said in a low voice, "Does everyone know the rules? Where were you when I won the Lockermodden Snow Rally 36 times in a row?" Magni also stretched out his short middle finger and pushed against his goggles. "Let me, Dan Morrow's racing god, show you what real racing skills are." Lang twisted the motorcycle's accelerator. With the brakes locked, the rear wheel gave off a puff of white smoke from the friction with the ground. Just in time to use my Kill You 3000 wheel supercharging system. Don't forget to see my taillights. The dwarf craftsman Jurban stretched out his short legs and stepped on the custom-made accelerator. The 4 of them were completely in the zone, full of energy. In 5 rounds, the one who pulls back the most number of guardians will be the winner, Duque said loudly. The winner will receive the title, Mount Akina's Racing God, Magni said. The loser will leave behind the emblem. Those who don't pull enough guardians, fall off the bike, or get their bikes destroyed will be considered losers, Lang said. By the way, what kind of place is Mount Akina? Jurban asked. Chapter 1603. Motorcycles. Although the Alliance had begun to study the lightning of diesel engines, the progress in engineering wasn't that simple. Duque had the system elf to help him memorize those distant memories, but he hadn't studied mechanical engineering before he transmigrated, so he only knew the general idea of many things and didn't know the details. Most of the time, the modification of a nut or a transmission shaft was a complete redesign. It was like a simpler bicycle. On Earth, the world's first bicycle was made of wood by the Frenchman Chirac in 1790. It wasn't until Duque transmigrated and experienced more than 200 years of history that he finally had a plan. There were bicycles with big and small wheels, wheelbarrows that pulled people on acrobatic roads without looking back, and everything else. Because the dwarves and gnome craftsmen had such amazing ideas, Duque had to follow history and change the motorcycle to something similar to the original design in history. However, it looked more like Arnold Schwarzenegger's Harley-Davidson motorcycle, Fat Boy, in the movie Terminator 2. It looked like a diesel car on the surface, but it was full of Titan technology inside. Because it didn't burn diesel, there was only a miniature Titan rune power array in the entire cylinder. 36 of the smallest Titan runes formed a structure that was almost perpetual. It would automatically absorb any basic elements around it, such as earth, water, fire, and wind as energy to replenish the power inside. Unfortunately, the energy absorbed was only enough for the motorcycle to crawl at a speed of 20 kilometers per hour. If he really wanted to perform fast and furious, he had to use up the stored energy. Because the element pool of this new motorcycle was very small and limited by the level of material science, the time it could reach 80 kilometers per hour was very short. To put it simply, 8 hours of charging, 5 minutes of acting cool. If the energy supply of the rifle mounted on the back of the motorcycle was taken into account, the time was even shorter. It could only be maintained for about 3 minutes while firing, and then it could only return to 20 kilometers per hour. Duque had his own ideas. He wanted to install a fully automatic ammunition chain and then synchronize it with magic so that the rifle would turn wherever the motorcycle's helmet turned. Unfortunately, at the moment when automatic rifles hadn't been developed, Duque could only extravagantly create a Titan ray rifle that didn't need ammunition by using the energy of the Titan runes as ammunition, like magic cannons. The price he had to pay was naturally a reduction in his racing time. Of course, the sneaky Duque wasn't willing to see the performance of the vehicles, including the motorcycles, drop so much. He installed external energy ports on Fatboy's motorcycle, Katyusha rocket launcher, and Mammoth tank. In theory, as long as a high-purity Titan energy crystal was inserted into the interface, the vehicle could be charged immediately, providing extreme power for a longer period of time. Alright, after talking for so long, why didn't the hero team just sweep over? My dear Mr. Gavin Rad has seen this in blood and tears. Although every guard in Oder's city wall area did not have the offensive power to destroy the world, their skin was thick enough to give any hero a headache at the current stage. That was not what was more desperate. While the vehicles were being prepared, Gavin Rad, who didn't believe in superstition, took advantage of his thick skin and thick flesh and started farming with his wind sword. In the end, a funny thing happened. After 3 hours of hard work, he carried more than a dozen iron dwarf-like cast steel defenders, and finally dismantled them into scrap metal, the cast steel defenders, that he had spent a lot of effort. A metal door in the distance opened, and a dozen identical iron dwarfs ran out to replace their original positions. Gavin Rad's body immediately bent forward in frustration, and he fell into a miraculous state with an ORZ posture that was similar to a dog crying. That's right, the entire Oder's city wall area was a defensive zone with a fully automated guard production factory. Any battle damage would be replaced by the main control computer of the defensive zone within a certain period of time. There was only one way to pass through the city wall area: kill faster than the production of the defense system, and you had to quickly advance to the main control tower of the factory. Only by destroying the tower could you stop the production of the guards in a part of the area. Anyone who tried to use human wave tactics to fight a war of attrition would only be drowned by the real human wave tactics. Moreover, assault battles were not to be fought casually. To put it bluntly, the only thing that could really restrain those guards was the energy weapons forged with Titan runes. Let's go, let's go. The 4 veteran drivers took the lead on their motorcycles, shaking off the slow Mammoth tanks and Katyusha rocket launchers 9 streets behind them. Since Oder itself had a large number of automatic attack vehicles, the entire area in front of the city wall area was paved with extremely flat super hard bricks. It was practically a holy ground for motorcycles. In the blink of an eye, even the taillights of the motorcycles could not be seen. Yahoo! Gerben used his light weight to his advantage and stepped on the accelerator all the way. The mini Titan engine let out a deafening roar, providing surging power to this large motorcycle that weighed almost half a ton. The entire heavy motorcycle seemed to be flying. Left turn, right turn. Galloping at high speed, Gerben's motorcycle made 3 S-shaped turns of different sizes, easily passing through the middle of the 10 iron dwarves without suffering any damage. Ha! You want to hit the god of racing? You're not qualified. Gerben laughed as he drove the motorcycle up a small steel slope. To be honest, he really enjoyed the feeling of riding on the clouds. However, he was just a little bit away from his extreme joy turning to sorrow. Right in front of him, next to a seemingly abandoned iron tower, a huge iron golem that was 2.5 stories tall suddenly appeared. This was called Etched Rune Golem, and it was a classic siege weapon. It raised its huge palm and slapped through the air. For a moment, Gerben almost peed his pants. If he hadn't activated a privately installed ejector at the last moment, His height would have dropped from 1 meter to less than 10 centimeters. Yep, he almost turned into minced meat. The few motorcycles that pretended to be pretentious received varying degrees of welcome from the guards. Magni was chased by a mechanical gnome battle tank. The mechanical gnome gripped the controls stick tightly and fired a series of machine guns at Magni. If Magni hadn't cheated by turning the Balrog hammer into a huge flame shield that blocked the area near the taillights, his motorcycle would have been blown to smithereens. Bulang was even more amazing. He had the ability to drive the motorcycle while using a Santos famous hunting rifle that dropped from the Sunwell to fight the mechanical attack plane 54A that looked like a helicopter in the sky. Among the few pretentious criminals, the most arrogant one was, of course, Duque. Relying on his familiarity with the terrain, Duque drove the motorcycle in a zigzag pattern and directly pulled over more than 1,000 guards over. Chapter 1604. Snakeskin movement sounded simple. It was just an S-shaped movement to avoid the attacks. In reality, it was not so easy to deal with the Titan guards with the precise calculation system. Different levels of calculation methods were destined to have different responses. The Titan guards here were cheating in the eyes of mortals. It was like playing rock, paper, scissors. The opponent would always be 1 second slower than you. By the time you finished, you could no longer change, and the opponent would be the one who countered you. Snakeskin movement was the same here. Many people thought that simple movement could disturb the guards, but it was not so. Without a truly random movement, there was no way to fool the Titan guards. The randomness of the human brain would often unintentionally hide one's habits. For example, leaning 10 degrees to the left for 2 seconds, and leaning 10 degrees to the right for 2 seconds. When the Titan guards figured out the pattern, they would probably be able to give the poor guy a song. Therefore, Duque discussed with the system elf and came up with the strongest anti-trap snakeskin movement system. It was the same dodging, but the other 3 guys would be shot if they dodged a few times. Although the motorcycle came with the Alliance's latest reactive armor and a magic shield that could be activated by activating the Titan rune system, it was still a motorcycle. After all, it could not be as big as the Mammoth tank. In terms of protection, it was only a fraction of the Mammoth tanks. After a few rounds of fierce attacks from the other party, even the most reckless Magni had no choice but to pull the few monsters back obediently. What about Duque? Damn it! Why can't those monsters hit you? Magni, who was also on his way back, saw Duque's performance, and his eyes almost popped out. Magni was really upset. Why did those brainless mechanical guards hit him? Apart from the first 2 or 3 shots, they were getting more and more accurate. In the end, almost all of them were sharpshooters, and he had to run like a rat. On Duque's side, he didn't feel that Duque was doing anything special. In any case, all the Titan guards seemed to have learned how to shoot. When Duque dodged to the left, they shot to the right. When Duque dodged to the right, they shot to the left. They circled around Duque's motorcycle and didn't hit a single one. If he had this kind of treatment, he dared to say that he could pull 10,000 monsters back. Duque smiled. Magni, your dodging is too formulaic. Even I can tell that you like to swing 15 degrees to the left for 3 seconds, then turn 10 degrees to the right for 2 seconds, then swing left for 2.5 seconds, and finally turn right for 4 seconds. What Duque said was the trajectory calculated by the system elf, so of course it wouldn't be wrong. Magni looked as if he had eaten a bunch of dead flies on the spot. His mouth was wide open, and he couldn't say anything for a long time. This guy didn't believe it. He decisively slowed down and went to lure another wave of people. This time, he deliberately changed his habits. In the first 10 seconds, the guards were indeed unable to hit him. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for him to hit his target with every shot, causing his motorcycle to smoke. The King of Ironforge was so frightened that he croaked. "What's wrong this time?" Shorty King looked like he was about to cry. He increased his speed and caught up with Duque to ask. This time, it's a fixed habit again after 20 seconds. Are you? Duque repeated Magni's actions again. This time, Magni had no choice but to admit defeat. He was King seen through again. Then how can I be like you and achieve full evasion? First, you have to have a system elf. Of course, the honest gentleman Mook smiled and said, you have to first prepare 100 different evasion patterns. You have to change one every 10 seconds. Only then will you be able to survive the 5 minutes safely. C. Magni had been with Duque for a long time. He had even learned the catchphrase of the Celestial Empire on Earth. When Magni was cursing, Duque swung his arm and used the Titan rune rifle on the motorcycle to blow up the head of a certain iron dwarf. Under Magni's gaze, a blue cube jumped out. Clearly, this was the purest form of arcane energy, or Titan energy. Duque swung his arm, and a steel cable shot out from the back of the motorcycle. There was a small hook at the top of the steel cable, and it accurately grabbed the blue cube and pulled it back into the motorcycle. Magni noticed that the originally empty energy tank on Duque's motorcycle was suddenly filled up. *CK. There was such a thing? Magni wasn't a marksman. Moving targets wasn't his forte. But the mechanical motorcycle had more than one attack ability. As long as it was a modification, there would be tricks. As the best blacksmith and mechanic in the world, Magni naturally mixed in a lot of his own stuff. It was only then that Duque realized that for the sake of racing, the back of his motorcycle was specially made. He had crazily stuffed a bunch of space bags into it. Magni pressed a red button, and the rear of the motorcycle spewed out a huge lump of asphalt, leaving a long black path along the high-speed motorcycle's trajectory. The Dwarf King then took out a cigar that had been lit at some point in time and took a deep puff. Then, without even looking, he threw it behind him. It instantly caused a huge fire. The mechanical guards that were following closely behind were instantly hit. This asphalt wasn't just any asphalt. It was added by Magni, the newest model of gunpowder that didn't cost any money. The shameless Magni had even asked the Alliance to reimburse them. The huge fire was accompanied by a violent explosion. More than 40 guards were burnt into scrap metal on the spot. The Titan energy cube wasn't something that every guard could drop. However, Magni had cast his net wide. After causing such a huge ruckus, he was bound to get something. As a matter of fact, he immediately obtained 2 energy bricks. As expected, none of the dwarves who could become leaders these days were useless. Brian's marksmanship was accurate, and his Titan ray rifle was always accurate. He fired fiercely at the team leader or the monsters that looked like elites. He would always be able to get energy bricks, and he would be able to use the battle to fuel the battle. Jerbin, the dwarf, was very smart. After listening to Duque's words, he actually learned Snakeskin, Basic. Although he couldn't dodge as beautifully as Duque, he could still dodge 70% to 80% of the time. In the end, when the 4 street racers returned, they had brought back more than 2,000 mechanical guards of various models. Holy light! Can we really kill so many enemies? Iril, who was sitting on the Katyusha rocket launcher, paled. Boss. Well done, I love you, Gavin, who was sitting in the driver's seat, shouted excitedly. He turned to Iril and yelled, prepare to fire the rocket launcher. The coordinates are 500 yards NW. Just fire at will. Fire at will? What if we blow up our own people? Iril was also anxious. T. It'd be great if those guys could be killed so easily. Duque's puppet aside, the other 2 can descend from heaven, and Jerbin has a full set of escape devices. Chapter 1605. Then I don't care anymore. After aiming, Hoof pressed the launch button with her eyes closed. In the next moment, the sound of the rocket propellant being ignited was so loud that it almost deafened Imriel. Only then did she remember to wear earphones. Not only were they earplugs, but they also had a magical communication system that Duque had personally made, which allowed sound to be transmitted. Only then did she hear Tyron's angry roar. Imriel, where are you aiming at? Are you going to kill your own people? Oh God, it's over. It's Duque, alright. You'll get your punishment later. Ever since Aurelia and Sasha were forced out of the hero group to wait for birth, and Sylvanus was forced out because he became a demigod, the Alliance's hero group had fallen into a ridiculous situation of lacking archers. Cannons had a parabolic trajectory. Apart from aiming with an iron sight, this thing also required a sense of shooting. After Bu Lang went racing, everyone suddenly realized that there were not enough archers to be the Katyusha's cannoneers. Tyrande, Lilith, and Chandri's, Tyrande's adopted daughter, added up to 3. However, there were 5 rocket launchers. Adding Solarian, who was considered a long-range mage, and Hoof, who was inexplicably thrown into the shooting seat, there were 5 cannoneers. In the end, coordination between infantry and cannons was not that fun, not to mention the more advanced coordination between vehicles and cannons. Hoof panicked and immediately sent a whole car full of 30 rockets at Duque, who was at the forefront. Looking at the dazzling fire meteors in the sky, half of which had missed and were all aimed at him, Duque did not know if he should say it out loud. The real Katyusha could cover the size of a football field. This time, Duque had used the magically modified Titan energy Katyusha to attack Otter. Blowing up an area the size of 3 football fields at once was no problem at all. Anyway, in the end, Duke's words changed to, "Don't worry. F***CK, Mark Dooku number 3, dead. Cause of death, killed by a stupid teammate." In Karazhan, Duque angrily threw down his controller as he watched the originally clear mirror images turn into snowflakes. The gaming experience was terrible. This game is playable? On the side, Onyxia and Vashti were covering their mouths and giggling. On the other side, Hoof was also scared out of her wits. Listening to the various sounds coming from the earpiece, her face was as white as a sheet. "What the hell? Why are you bombing Duque?" Theon's voice rang out. "Duque's substitute has been killed." The shameless Bu Lang was the first to let out a surprised voice. "Really?" There was a clear hint of excitement in Magni's voice. "Really?" This time, the title of Mount Akina's racing god is in suspense again. Jerbin yelled excitedly. What followed was a series of pecks between chickens. When Duque controlled Mark Dooku No. 4 to rush back to the scene, they had already destroyed the first Guardian factory, and there wouldn't be any more iron dwarfs surging out for the time being. What Duke saw was a miserable-looking Hoof who kept saying, "I'm sorry," and a cocky Magni who opened his palm and asked Duke for the car emblem. "Give me the car logo. Duque, you can't go back on your word. We agreed beforehand that being killed counts as a loss." Looking at this smug rookie dwarf racer, Duque rolled his eyes and pointed at the debris that had been blown up by Hoof. "There, the car logo is over there. Look for it yourself." "Oh, no." Magni instantly felt bored with the title of Mount Akina's racing god that he had picked up by sheer luck. Duque shrugged, then went over to touch Hoof's head. "Don't take it to heart. Just be more careful next time." But Hoof was so upset that he was about to cry. "I'm really fine. In the end, it's the fault of a certain fellow who's good at long-range attacks and went racing." With that, Duque's gaze turned sharp as he swept his gaze across the room. A certain Bronzebeard family's 3rd son immediately shrunk his neck, then shifted his short legs and sat on Hoof's previous seat. Imriel's eyes were still brimming with tears. "To be honest, Flaming Beast itself isn't worth my time. But Odor's first son was a very meaningful battle for the Alliance. I hope every leader of the Alliance can experience this personally." When Duque said this, the whole place quieted down. Then, Duque began to explain the significance of this battle. 25,000 years ago, the Titans of the Pantheon had to deal with the demons that came from the twisting void to maintain the peace of the universe. It was a never-ending war. Other than the extremely powerful demons, there were also countless low-level demons running around. The Pantheon had to send out their strongest battle titan, Sargeras, to deal with those powerful demons. But how did those low-level demons deal with them? With that, everyone followed Duque's gaze and looked at the Titan guards that had been reduced to rubble. If we can obtain the defense system left behind by the Titans, we can use the endless mechanical guards as the first line of defense to protect Azeroth. Of course, this is something to be happy about. But we have to prepare for the worst. We might not be able to obtain any advanced technology directly from Odor. That's not important. What's important is that as the strongest in the Alliance, as the leaders of the Alliance, we must first have a broad vision and know what the future war will be like. The population of our races is limited. If we want to train a swordsman, even if we train him from a young age, it will take at least 16 years to train a barely qualified swordsman. But he might not even last a minute on the battlefield before being killed by a powerful demon that can resurrect. Life is limited. Using a limited life to fight against an unlimited number of enemies. This kind of thinking is wrong. We should cherish the lives of our soldiers more. So, I hope that everyone can develop a newer, more forward-looking thinking about war. Of course, we have to continue to train traditional professionals. This is the foundation for us to fight against the strongest of the Burning Legion. But for those ordinary people who don't have the talent to be professionals, we have to teach them new forms of war. For example, high-energy rifles, the Titan cannons we saw today, and the interstellar battleships we may seize in the future. When Deity said this, everyone was already deep in thought. We are the leaders of the Alliance, and also the helmsmen of the advancement of the various races and countries. If our thinking is rigid and refuses to accept new things, then the destruction of Azeroth will enter the countdown. So, we have to take advantage of this rare opportunity to see more, listen more, and think more. I hope that after we defeat Yogg-Saron, we can see everyone with a new way of thinking and outlook. Chapter 1606. Before reaching the demigod realm, Deity had been focused on improving himself. When he arrived, he felt that it was difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 hands. This was a very practical problem. When the planet Azeroth's protective spell formation was still in place, he organized the defense of a dark portal, and at most, Karazhan, the Sunwell and the Dalagen. Apart from these few places, there were no other places on the planet where demons could descend on a large scale. However, when the planet's protective spell formation collapsed, it would be a basket full of holes. Patching it up would be a joke, unless a brand new cover was built to cover the entire Azeroth. Deity knew that was impossible. Sargeras would eventually return from the abyss. At that time, if he didn't fail, the war with the Burning Legion would never end. One day, the creatures of Azeroth would use up their last drop of blood, and the destruction of planet Azeroth would mark the end. It was unimaginable how big a Titan was at its peak. Deity only knew that Sargeras was huge. During the Ancient War, Sargeras had desperately shrunk himself, trying to find a way to pass through the portal. Just from the parts of his body, he could tell that he was at least a few dozen stories tall. And this was the shrunken version. In his complete form, he was probably not much smaller than planet Azeroth. Even if Deity became a true god, it probably wouldn't be enough to fight such an opponent. Deity didn't know what realm was above the true god. He only knew that the few ancient gods, as well as the fire demon King Ragnaros and the other elemental lords, had all been crushed by the Pantheon army led by Sargeras and rubbed against the ground. In the end, purely for the sake of Xing Hun, they weren't really killed. After transmigrating to Azeroth, Deity was enlightened. Anyway, this world was the same as the game and history he was familiar with. If one person couldn't beat an elite monster, they would find 2 companions, and the 3 of them would kill it together. A small boss would find a team of 5 to kill it. A big boss would be killed by a team of 15 or 20 people. If they couldn't even deal with the final boss, they would send a 40-man team to kill it. If an ordinary powerhouse couldn't do it, he would send a hero. If a hero couldn't do it, he would send a demigod. If one race didn't have enough people, then they would add a few more races. If the alliance wasn't enough, then they would add the horde. If that wasn't enough, then they would recruit people from all over the universe. They would definitely be able to find top-notch experts to fight against the Burning Legion. In addition, Deity was crazily using his advanced technology to wipe out the Burning Legion's advantage in numbers. With such a quantitative and qualitative change, would Sargeras die or not? Of course, the prerequisite for all of this was that the leaders of the Alliance didn't court death. Although Deity was the helmsman, for the ship to sail smoothly, it still needed the cooperation of many people. The more advanced technology was, the more leaders needed to be open-minded and realistic at the same time. Fortunately, apart from Theon and Gavin Rad, who were in their 50s, the other leaders in the Alliance were either very young, or monsters who weren't very old or wouldn't age. The dwarves, elves, and Draenei were all long-lived, while Dumak, Jaina, Kalia, and Alicia were all cheats. Duque planned that when the time was right, he would ask the great hoodwinker Valen to come out and trick Theon into eternal life in the name of the Master of Holy Light. The Empress Dowager, who had more than 40 years of combat experience but only had the body of an 18-year-old, was intoxicating. With a smile on his face, Duque watched the performance of the leaders of the Alliance. Wow, this anti-air cannon is so powerful. Ever since Bulang was captured and brought back to fight Katyusha, Hoof had been thrown onto another mammoth tank to take charge of the anti-air cannon. The advanced technology left behind by the Titans was definitely beyond imagination. Hoof had seen the grappling hook attached to the mammoth tank fly out and grab a broken statue puppet. It pulled it directly into a burning furnace at the back of the tank. After a series of rumbling sounds, a large amount of psychedelic liquid flowed out and was injected into the tank's spare parts. When needed, Iril only had to press a button, and the Titan runic circle engraved in the inner space of the tank would emit a mysterious blue glow. Then, the hallucinogenic liquid would be injected into the anti-air rocket's rack, and it would form a rocket by itself. It was said that it was called sulfur. Once fired, it would shoot forward at a high speed with a range of 1,000 yards. Anything it hit would explode on the spot, and everything within a 10-yard radius would be affected. What was even more insane was that such a high-damage rocket only had a gap of 0.25 seconds between shots. This was enough to make all the anti-air cannons in the Alliance self-destruct. Even the Alliance's highly classified Vulcan machine gun, which was being researched to replace the 40mm Bofors, would not have such a performance, let alone the octuple cannon. This was a terrifying firepower that surpassed the theoretical value of the Vulcan machine gun. Looking at the rapid and violent rockets raining down on the hovering mechanical attack aircrafts, the few dwarves fell into deep thought at the same time. Other than the dwarves, the other leaders were nervous and silent. Bang, 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 bang. That was the mammoth tank firing a cannon every second, a magnificent burst of 4 shots. Not far away, a large group of iron dwarfs that had been pulled over by motorcycles were instantly blasted dozens of meters into the air, turning into piles of black parts that scattered on the ground within a radius of 100 meters with a pitter-patter. Everyone could imagine what would happen to a normal person if they were hit by this advanced technology. That's right, Sister Kalia. Why are you not nervous at all? I see that the other leaders are thinking about the future of the Alliance, and even the entire planet. Why should I be nervous? I didn't want to be the queen of Lordaeron in the first place. It was Duque who made me do it. If Duque is willing, I can give the throne to him at any time. Then at least I won't have to bear so many burdens and be busy all day. The Hoof was silent for a while before saying, "You actually gave up your responsibilities so easily? You can bear to see your compatriots fall or die." "Of course I can't bear to, but what can I do?" Kalia, who was in the main cannon position, tilted her little golden head and seemed a little distressed. "I might pass as a priest. They all think that my holy light is already very close to the level of an archbishop. But I don't have the ability to manage and the bearing of a king. Letting someone without talent lead a country with millions of people is a disaster in itself. If it wasn't for Duque's insistence and letting Sister Elugia help me manage Lordaeron, I would have quit long ago. You know, my biggest dream in life was to be a bride." Chapter 1607. Imriel was speechless. In a sense, the queens in Duque's harem were blessed because they did not have to worry too much. If they could not keep up with Duque's development, they could just leave it to someone who could. In essence, Alterac, Lordaeron, and Kull, Tiras seemed to be beginning to merge into one country. Imriel was still a little confused. The progressive king began to think about how to let his people and country keep up with the changes in the world. The queens who were full of trust in Duque simply handed the country to Duque. Imriel did not know if the Draenei could keep up with the changes in the world. If one day they could not, would it be a blessing to choose to give up the sovereignty of their people and strive to fully integrate into the Alliance? Hoof was silent. More than a dozen super chariots, built with Titan technology provided by Torim and Duque, almost flattened the way. There were rune-etched statues, mechanical gnome battle tanks, mechanical attack machine 54A, and other Titan guards scattered on the ground. When they drove the vehicles to occupy a huge maintenance platform and watched the fully automatic mechanical arms automatically repair all the damage on the vehicles, Duque finally announced that it was time for the boss battle. That's the main point. Please remember, the flame behemoth cannot be forcefully held back. That thing has thick skin and flesh and can only be ground. Don't think that you can destroy this thing with your own attack power. This guy is specially made, and his vitality is 100 times stronger than Jaden, who came to the Sunwell last time. Only Titan runes can deal with Titan runes. After Duque emphasized, more than a dozen chariots started moving again, rumbling as they drove toward the final passage of the city wall. In history, a group of dwarves, after plowing the outer city wall area with cannons, impatiently ran to the final passage to continue to have a bonfire party. In the end, the party was right, but unfortunately, they became the party's barbecue. If not for this spite of Torim's reminder, the people in the hero group would never have thought that there would suddenly be a steel monster that was like a moving mountain, rushing out of the huge 100-meter door to cause trouble. Even though Torim had personally described the appearance of the flaming behemoth to everyone, and even Duque had made a 3D holographic image for everyone to see and explain the key points. To be honest, the appearance of the flaming beast was really King ugly. On the left and right sides of the carriage were two huge golden wheels, with a very dwarf-style transmission lever on top. At the front of the carriage was a shovel-like troubleshooter commonly seen on trains. What made it look like a war machine instead of a motorcycle were the 4 turrets, 2 groups of rocket launchers, and a huge cylindrical cannon that were densely arranged on the roof. When the experts of the Alliance found out that the cannon-like thing was a flamethrower that could spit out a temperature of 10,000 degrees Celsius, no one wanted to forcefully destroy the steel monster with their physical bodies. What kind of joke was this? With that kind of heat, even paladins with invincibility would not be able to withstand it for a few seconds, right? Even though they understood the logic and strategy, they were still deeply shocked when they truly faced this giant steel beast left behind by the Titan giants. Just as the mechanized armored convoy of the Alliance seemed to be walking step by step towards the entrance of the city wall area, suddenly an extremely exaggerated explosion sound came from the deepest part of the city gate. It was clearly the simplest explosion, but it was as if a terrifying aura had suddenly descended out of thin air, adding to everyone on the battlefield. It was the pressure brought about by absolute power and a sense of destruction. Clang! The huge city gate, which was over 100 meters tall and at least 50 meters wide, instantly let out the loudest cry that metal could make under the impact of the flaming beast, and it burst into pieces. It was not just the city gate. Even the sturdy metal door frame of the city gate, which only had a small black mark on it after being bombarded by the 105mm howitzer, was directly smashed into pieces by this impact. Violent bricks and metal fragments shot out like a terrible storm. Even though they were lined up 500 meters away and hiding in the vehicle protected by the miniature Titan runic circle, everyone immediately had goosebumps. They felt as oppressive as if an old Kil'jaeden had suddenly descended upon the broad square in his full strength. Although everyone knew that was impossible. Not to mention the fact that the old man's upper body had just been blown up last time, it would take him 8 to 10 years to recover. And even if he came personally, it was impossible for him to emit such a simple and violent aura of destruction. But Eridar's destruction had a mysterious artistic aura. Enemy, destroy. Magically, the electronic voice that came from the flaming beast was actually in the King common language. Immediately, the 4 superhuge wheels of the flaming beast, which were at least 8 stories in diameter, began to spin at high speed on the solid mysterious material floor. But it seemed to be stepping on the brakes. Countless sparks splashed on the ground, and just the harsh sound of friction alone showed that the flaming beast was King increasing its speed to the maximum. "Stop him!" someone shouted. Without hesitation, Theon stepped on the accelerator, and the mammoth tank he was driving was already the first to speed up. Wait. For a moment, hooves almost wanted to jump out of the car. Immediately, a huge shield opened up around the mammoth tank. It was an electromagnetic shield that was mixed with the Titan runic circle. In theory, it could greatly reduce all kinds of attacks. Without giving the 3 people in the car time to react, there was a loud explosion. The strong impact, even with the external spring shock absorber of the spherical cockpit to reduce the impact, Kalia still felt as if she had been hit hard by the Minotaur Chief Kane's totem pole. Her whole body arched from the pain. Hooves, who had better physical fitness, opened her mouth wide. Her face was full of surprise, as if she still did not know what had happened until this moment. But blood immediately gushed out of her mouth and nose. She hurriedly chanted a spell, ready to cast Holy Flash on herself. Unexpectedly, Kalia, who was clearly in a similar state of confusion, reached out to her first and cast Holy Word, Shield. As it turned out, it was a little unnecessary. Holy Word, Shield, could prevent further damage from the impact, but it was meaningless to treat internal bleeding. But Imriel still admired Kalia's reaction speed after years of training. Holy Flash had finally been cast. The 3 people in the car finally returned to normal, and only then did they realize that the battle had begun to heat up in the first second. Chapter 1608. Magic eyes had been installed in every driver's seat to act as a surveillance camera. Seeing Theon driving a tank to block the flaming beast charge, Duque felt like strangling the Empress Dowager. Kalia also suffered minor internal injuries and had a nosebleed. Fortunately, Kalia had been a professional for many years, and after passing the heroic rank, her physique had improved by leaps and bounds. If she was still the delicate little princess from back then, her internal organs would have been crushed long ago. Theon, damn it, where's the kiting? Come on, you're a driver now, not a warrior carrying the enemy's boss. Sorry. I'm really sorry. Theon also knew that he had been impulsive. That was the instinct of a paladin. He wasn't alone, but the captain of a tank. His rash actions would directly affect his companions in the 2 cannon positions. Although the mammoth tank looked huge and was 3 stories tall, it paled in comparison to the 8-story flaming beast. Too bad there's not enough earth elemental energy here. Otherwise, I could transform and there wouldn't be so much trouble. Magni couldn't forget that gorgeous transformation in Alcaphen's treasury. Kite it. According to the agreement, do what you have to do. Duke roared in the comms channel. Then, 3 coquettish motorcycles sped to the front of the flaming beast. Duke, Magni, and Gerben followed the center of the plaza and scattered a large amount of asphalt in a circular shape that was almost joined together. Whoever's being chased by the flaming beast, come and run the circle. As soon as Duque finished speaking, he saw a beam of red laser light from the front of the flaming beast focused on Katiusha number 3. It's finally my turn. The driver was Duque's little servant, Vanessa. As an agile thief, her driving was also very fast. As she stepped on the brakes, she turned the steering wheel abruptly. The entire modified Katiusha rocket launcher that weighed more than 20 tons drifted in front of her. The huge rear of the vehicle swayed left and right in front of the flaming beast. What made Duque the most speechless was that Vanessa actually had a voice. Come on, uncle, come and play. That deliberately pretended coquettish voice was extremely coquettish. Duque was speechless. Could it be that even a mechanical war chariot would ask for mating? It had to be said that the female driver really couldn't afford to get hurt when racing. Other cars had to slow down to make a turn, but Vanessa didn't slow down at all when she was drifting. Asphalt was designed to trap the flaming beasts that used wheels to run. The Alliance's mammoths and Katiusha had been modified to run on tracks, so they were not afraid of asphalt at all. As for the motorcycle, if he still dashed in front of such a big pile of asphalt, then he shouldn't call himself the Akina mountain racing god. Sure enough, as soon as they entered the asphalt area, the blazing beast's 4 big wheels that were 6 or 7 stories tall became its weakness. Of course, that bit of asphalt couldn't stick to the huge wheels, but it miraculously produced a skidding effect. Just like that, the steel beast slowed down. Focus fire. At Duque's command, The Alliance vehicles that had only responded with secondary cannons all opened their cannons, pouring all kinds of firepower at the blazing beast. The asphalt that had been laid on the ground suddenly ignited into a raging fire, roasting the blazing beast's territory with a crackling sound. It was funny that dragons could spit fire, but he was immune to fire. Why would the blazing beast be hurt by fire when it played with fire? It didn't make sense. But as the battle went on, the intensity of the battle increased rapidly. The Alliance used cannons and rocket launchers against the blazing beast, as well as large bombs modified from iron ore. The blazing beast retaliated with weapons such as flame jets and missiles, and summoned more helicopter-like attack planes, as well as spider tanks piloted by mechanical gnomes into the field. When the violent firepower was wantonly shooting at each other, when the exaggerated missiles that were like fireworks drew out dazzling trajectories in the air, when the bombs crisscrossed on the battlefield, everyone suddenly realized that there was almost no safe place in this battlefield that was several square kilometers wide. Every Alliance powerhouse was aware of their own insignificance. This was not a destructive force that mortals could resist with their bodies. If they hadn't been hiding in the safety of the heavy armored vehicles, they would have long been like the mechanical guards that had broken in, beaten into pieces. It's time to eject. The first to be ejected by the human cannon was Edwin Van Cleef. As a thief, as a father with no worries, he volunteered to be the first to eject. To shoot out of the 1-meter diameter human cannon, draw the right arc, and land on top of the blazing beast, preferably in between the 4 turrets of the blazing beast. This required very accurate gunnery skills, as well as good luck. One misstep and he would type GG amidst a series of screams, and his life would be game over. He had no choice but to throw him over. The giant flame beast had a special effect called speed gathering. If he left it alone, this thing would continuously increase his movement speed until it reached 100%. At that time, the sluggish giant steel beast would become a flying mountain with the speed of a Ferrari sports car. It would be like flying, crashing and crashing. In order to more effectively destroy the blazing beast, the best way was naturally to follow the information provided by the traitor, Torim. By destroying the turrets on top of the blazing beast, it would achieve the effect of overloading the blazing beast for a short period of time. In that case, the effects of all attacks would increase by 50%. Now, Edwin was going to be the first to jump. In the past, when Duque played the game, he didn't feel much danger. At most, he would slip and fall, and then call for a motorcycle to pick him up. Looking at Edwin now, even Duque was worried for him. The firepower of the 4 turrets was comparable to that of a Vulcan cannon. As if discovering that Edwin was jumping towards its vitals, the blazing beast actually activated its self-defense measures. The 4 turrets that had been raining shells on the surrounding Alliance vehicles returned to their positions in an instant, and rained a barrage of bullets on Edwin in the sky. That was a Titan's energy barrage. Even with Edwin's equipment, he would be heavily injured if not dead after taking one shot, not to mention hundreds and thousands of yellow light bullets raining down on him at the same time. The densely packed barrage made one's scalp tingle just by looking at it. Edwin was about to be turned into a beehive in the next second. In that moment, time seemed to freeze. Even Vanessa couldn't help but exclaim, "Dad!" At this critical moment, Edwin seemed to have flipped on some extraordinary switch. Not many people present saw how he did it. Suddenly, the speed at which he was falling increased. His entire body turned into a phantom as he drew a strange line in the air that occasionally curved at 90 degrees, and finally landed on top of the blazing beast. Duque was stunned at first, and then exclaimed in surprise, "Edwin has become a legendary hero." Chapter 1609. After Azeroth's physical professions broke through to the hero rank, they would reach the epic and legendary ranks. There were only a few dozen people in the entire Alliance who could break through to the hero rank. In fact, the Alliance had a batch of outstanding juniors, such as Bolvar Fordragon's daughter, Mara Fordragon, and Lena Thunderspear, the daughter of Dwarf General Fandral Thunderspear, who had been stationed in Alterac. There were also Dwarf Paladin Crom Twilight's Hammer, Great Mage Uniet, Great Conjurer Mimic, Hunterlin, and so on. They were all the new elites of the Alliance who had reached the hero rank. Some of these fellows should have died in history, while others only started to show their talents after the Burning Legion's invasion. It was obvious that Duque's appearance had changed their fates. Sometimes, Duque wanted to groom them, but these fellows were still a little immature. Duque couldn't be sure if he could help them grow like he did with William. Also, Duque didn't want to promote them prematurely without any special reason. The Alliance's hero squad wasn't lacking in manpower. Duque could pull in able-bodied people in the past, and he could even stuff Sally Whitemane in. However, the hero squad, which represented the Alliance's highest combat power, had a fixed number of members. If they wanted someone to join them, they had to be skilled. Strength and experience were both indispensable. When facing an opponent like Yogg-Saron, nothing major happened. Duque didn't want to train new people. At this moment, seeing that his old subordinate Edwin had broken through to the legendary rank, Duque was shocked. He had already changed too much history. The original Edwin should have died a few years ago. He had been forced to betray Stormwind City and died on a bounty. Whether it was him, Vashj, or Onyxia, these guys who were originally villains had all joined Duke's side. Even Duque didn't know how long these fellows could live or what the upper limit of their potential was. So Edwin's breakthrough was definitely a pleasant surprise. Old Fan's move just now was a bit like Shadow Step, but it wasn't. Shadow Step definitely didn't have such a long jump distance. No matter what, at least Edwin had successfully landed on top of the blazing beast. As soon as he went up, a pair of beautiful epic-ranked daggers started flying up and down. Since he was using a dagger, it was not as brutal as a heavy weapon. Edwin's movements were like a butcher dismembering an ox. Large amounts of screws flew into the air, and then the entire turret was disassembled into components. At the turret's position, a distorted electric light burst out. That was an energy overload comparable to 100,000 volts of high-voltage electricity. No one would be able to withstand it. Edwin was very quick-witted. After confirming that the turret had been destroyed, he immediately fled. After doing a beautiful somersault in the air to avoid the continuous bombardment, he made a low-altitude gliding movement. He didn't even need Magna to specifically look for him as he flew to the side of Magna's car and quickly hid in the back seat of Magna's motorcycle, enjoying the protection of the armor. F***CK. Just based on this move of his, he must be given credit. The effect of the internal circuit overload caused by the explosion of the turret was extremely obvious. The blazing beast that had been accelerating just a moment ago suddenly slammed on the brakes as if it was stuck, and silently paralyzed on the spot. Even without Duque's reminder, all the Alliance powerhouses controlled their weapons and fired the cannons at full force. On Katiusha, the cannoneer didn't bother to cast the pyrite into the shape of a rocket. That was too slow. It created a large bomb in the shape of a wine barrel and threw it directly at the blazing beast. The shell of the blazing beast that was originally ferocious gradually changed shape. Unfortunately, the overload time was very short. Tarim had made a bet that there would be 10 seconds of paralysis, but in reality, it was less than 8 seconds. It was even worse than in the game before Duque transmigrated. Fortunately, the birth of black technology and the loading of the Titan circuit made the firepower of the Alliance's special vehicles much higher than in the history of the Alliance during the same period. Especially the Mammoth tank's quadruple main cannon. The power of its desperate firing at close range was definitely above the 400 mm and above main cannons of the Alliance's mainstream flying battleships. That was because it was using the energy of the Titan runes. After a round of simultaneous bombardment, they returned to the pattern of chasing each other. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that as long as they didn't make any mistakes in the following 3 rounds, the blazing beast would be defeated. Gavin Rad, who was the second to be thrown onto the turret, was very stable. He first activated his invincibility and took the barrage of 3 turrets head-on. When he landed, Gavin Rad, who was wielding his wind sword, seemed to have transformed into a plumber and easily destroyed the second turret. In the end, it was bounced to the ground and picked up by Jurbin. The third was Liadeline. What she had to do was almost a copy of Gavin Rad. The Blood Elf Lord's maneuvers were as fierce as a tiger's. Even though she didn't have any divine weapons, she had gradually risen to the top, so no matter what she did, it was quite reassuring. No one expected that when the fourth to appear, Daneth Trollbane, was blasted out from the human cannons, something would go wrong. No one knew if the blazing beast had the ability to learn, or if it had a different attack pattern when it was about to be destroyed. Seeing a human cannonball like Daneth flying over, the blazing beast actually F*King reversed. In the end, Daneth missed, and was sent flying to the front of the blazing beast's huge obstacle eliminator in his thick armor. If Magni hadn't sped over to pull Daneth up, he would probably be the first king of the Alliance to die on the battlefield after the third dark portal. Backup? Where's the backup? Duque yelled in the comms channel. Every Katyusha had a backup ammunition for the human cannons. The next few scenes made the Alliance powerhouses look like they had seen a ghost. The first backup was Gavin Rad, who was sent back to the Katyusha again. This time, he wasn't flashy, and was dodged by the blazing beast with a flick of its tail. Gavin Rad was directly ejected to the towering wall in the distance. Well, it wasn't wrong to say that he was ejected to the wall. The second backup was Theon. He jumped from the tank to the rocket launcher, but when he fired, the blazing beast dodged again. As a result, the Empress Dowager hit the surface of the huge shield-shaped wheel and fell half to her death. The third backup was Vanessa. She was intercepted by a large number of rockets in midair and couldn't make it through the barrage. When her equipment couldn't take it anymore, she had to use Shadow Step to return to the vehicle she came out from. The effect of the blazing beast's speed was getting stronger and stronger. By now, it was already flying. Who else? Duque was also anxious. Just then, a shout came from midair, "Me too! Me." Then, a paladin who seemed to have a tail successfully landed, Chapter 1610. Watch me. A slim and fit blue-skinned female paladin swung a one-handed hammer high up and smashed it on the turret. Her strength was so strong that the first hammer hit the cannon barrel crooked. It was fine if the cannon barrel was crooked, but unfortunately, the last turret that was firing at full power actually fired in front of a person who was racing on a motorcycle. Yes, it was Duque. This scared Duque half to death. Because it was not a normal cannon shot, the F*King cannon shot in a circle like a left hook, and it even hid behind a bunch of rockets. Even the system elf could not catch it in time. After all, Mark Dooku was a level 2, and the calculation and operation of the system elf was definitely a level lower. Regardless of the process, it was not the first time Duque was F*King tricked by Hoof. It was just that none of the previous times were as troublesome as this one. If Mark Dooku died again, he would not be able to find a replacement, and if there was a small problem with the magical communication, it would not be surprising for the whole team to be wiped out. Hoof. Get down after dismantling the turret, Duque finally could not help but curse. Hoof was dismantling the turret as if she was demolishing a house. Just when she was enjoying the process, after being shouted at by Duque, Hoof panicked and realized that the turret under her hammer had already been destroyed, and a huge energy flow was accumulating at the base of the turret, which was already a big hole. With a scream, Imriel kicked the ground with both of her hooves, making a beautiful movement similar to an antelope's legs, and finally flew out before the giant flame beast overloaded. Fire! Bu Lang shouted with all his might, almost squeezing out the last bit of air in his lungs. In an instant, an overwhelming amount of cannon fire hit the giant flame beast, and the powerful shockwave from the cannon fire alone sent Hoof flying even further away. "Ah! Save me!" Hoof screamed, because she suddenly realized that she had fallen into a fire belt made of asphalt. In a second, the Alliance's new dish, braised hoof in soy sauce, was about to be born. Suddenly, a grappling hook flew over and grabbed the hoof's unreasonably thin waist with incredible precision. A huge horizontal force pulled the hoof back from above the sea of fire. This was the last chance to focus fire. If they didn't destroy the flaming behemoth this time, the flaming behemoth would no longer have the chance to overload and activate gather speed again. In the end, all the Alliance vehicles would be destroyed and the Alliance's hero team would be completely wiped out. Duque didn't care so much about the hooves. He activated all the weapons on the motorcycle and poured a barrage of bullets at the blazing beast. Boom! There was a loud bang. As the first and most distinctive iron behemoth boss that the Titans left in Duque, it finally fell under the siege of the Alliance's vehicles with an earth-shattering explosion. At this moment, Duque realized that he seemed to have forgotten something. Duque did not expect that the hook would not be able to pull the hoof to the back seat. Instead, the damn hoof broke free, and he was smashed into the cockpit like a fallen tree. Bang! The impact was like Mars hitting Earth. Puppet Mark saw stars. Looking at the blurry display, Duque, who was in Karazhan, felt a headache. When the display returned to normal, something seemed wrong. What the hell was this thing that looked like a camel toe? Wait, why was there a tail? In the next second, he felt pain. The shared feeling that Mark Dooku gave Duque made Duque feel that something was wrong. Woo-woo! The sound of hooves could be heard from below. Only then did Duque see clearly that the hoof was in the driver's seat, playing with Mark Dooku. While it was struggling, a long blue tail was moving around, slapping Mark's face. F***CK. What kind of divine body is this? At this moment, Duque was on the verge of breaking down. The shameless maid and Mount No. 1 were smirking. Not caring so much anymore, Duque made up his mind. He asked Mark to pull the hoof's tail and pull out the guy who would occasionally lose his mind. Ooh, what was that just now? I almost couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to suffocate to death. The flustered hoof covered its but as it expressed its feelings. The veins on Duque's forehead bulged. He could only comfort himself amidst the malicious laughter around him. Mark Dooku isn't me. Not me. As the largest central boss of the first half of the wall area, the giant flame beast stopped moving. All the defenders in the wall area also stopped moving. The first stage of the attack was considered perfect. At this time, everyone crawled out of their vehicles in fear and carefully looked around. None of the vehicles were in good condition. The mammoth tank with its 3 gun barrels twisted like a fried dough twist, the Katyusha with its rocket launcher blown to the top of the city wall, the motorcycle with its 2 tires burst and only the wheel frame was left standing. This scene was as embarrassing as one could imagine. Fortunately, no one in the entire team was seriously injured, let alone dead. Magni, I'll leave the remaining 3 guys in the wall area to you, Duque ordered. The next 3 bosses in the city wall area were a bit more normal. Whether it was the giant boss Ignis the Furnace Keeper, Ancestor Dragon Edge Scale, or the mechanical giant XT-002 Disassembler, none of them were a match for the Alliance's hero squad. With the strategy in hand, defeating the boss was not a problem. I'll stay. As soon as Jurban spoke, Duque knew what he wanted to do. The master craftsman secretly kicked Magni's calf, and Magni immediately understood. Duque, these mechanical creations are all controlled by Yogg-Saron anyway. Maybe one day, even if the Titans descend again, they will purify the whole of Order. Then we might as well take advantage of it. Think about it, our Naxxramas, that. The dwarf king stuttered, and Duque only wanted to laugh. This bunch of dwarves were really addicted to picking up trash. Duque straightened his face and said righteously, whether it's the guardians that the Titans left in Azeroth, or us native creatures who voluntarily protect Azeroth, our position and goal are the same. How can we covet the things of our allies? We must return them to the guardians of Order. Duque's words made the dwarves shiver, and they all lowered their heads, not daring to make a sound. Unexpectedly, after Duque finished lecturing them, he changed the topic. Of course, if we do our best to make the Guardians regain their rationality, and kill Yogg-Saron before the Titans descend, we will return Azeroth to a pure land. Then, on account of this achievement, I believe the Titans will not blame us for the Flame Behemoth or XT-002 being completely destroyed and taken away for recycling, right? The 3 dwarves went from being disappointed to being pleasantly surprised. Then, after a long while, Jurban finally said, I finally know why you are the commander of the Alliance, and why I have to listen to you. Chapter 1611. While Duque was attacking Order, Arthas was not idling around either. The Lich King rarely left his ice throne, except for a few matters, such as this. How is it? This was a special testing ground located at the top of the Ice Crown Fortress. When the two Scourge Army officials heard Arthas's question, they looked troubled. They looked at each other. In the end, the genius scientist in charge of the Scourge Army's development of various plagues, zeros, poisonous gas and ooze, Professor Putricide, who was now an undead, took a step forward in the face of the Lich King's possible wrath. He looked at the petri dish that was as large as a tall building, and its surface was soaked in a green viscous liquid. Dozens of withered white bones were suspended in the liquid, but these bones seemed out of place in the surrounding green viscous liquid. They were not dissolved by the viscous liquid, and because of the aftermath of some power in their bodies, they resisted the adhesion of the viscous liquid. And a translucent blue dragon soul was floating slowly in it, as if it was sleeping. He shook his head. The Damned Alliance and the Sleeping Dragon Temple have purified him too thoroughly, and his soul is on the verge of collapse. It is very likely that, even if he is recast as a bone dragon, his combat power will still be weaker than the previous Syndagosa. Is there no other way? I don't need his rationality, I don't need his endurance, I only need his combat power, even if it's for a short period of time, Arthas said in a low voice. Another Scourge Army official, the Blood Queen Lanise, suddenly said, "Actually, we still have a method that we haven't tried." Even a crazy and ruthless character like Professor Putricide suddenly changed his expression when he heard the first half of this sentence. The soulfire in his eyes flickered non-stop. You mean that thing? The power it contains is too terrifying. We can't control it at all. What thing? Hearing this, Arthas's interest was piqued. After being betrayed by his teammate, the professor could only bite the bullet and say, "Actually, when the Sleeping Dragon Temple had no time to deal with us, our excavation team dug up something interesting in the northwest of Dragonbone Waste. At first, we didn't know what it was. We only knew that it was very huge, and then..." The professor explained in detail to Arthas. Soon, a slightly high-spirited voice came from under the Lich King's heavy ice-blue helmet. "Sure, let's use it." As soon as she finished speaking, Arthas focused her gaze. Her blue eyes beneath her helmet instantly traversed space and landed on Alexstrasza and the Red Dragon Legion, who were crouching on the outskirts of the Ice Crown Glacier. It was precisely because of the Red Dragon Army's cover and suppression that the Lich King's troops could not openly leave the Ice Crown Glacier. The only way out was the secret passage that extended from the Ice Crown Glacier all the way to the ancient Spider Kingdom, Ajo-Nerub. Not long ago, the Calamity Army's war against the Spider Clan was very intense. That was because the Arachni would dig a hole and flee if the battle went south. Despite the fierce resistance of this underground kingdom, the Scourge troop eventually occupied this place and slaughtered some of the Nerub insects. Now it was full of scars from years of war and disrepair, and it was divided between two forces. A portion of them became Arachni loyal to the Lich King, the standard undead Nerub. The other part was located at the bottom of the ancient kingdom in Anka, where another group of enemies called the Faceless Ones were restless. Obviously, destroying the undead Nerub insects and their contaminated eggs would be a huge blow to the Lich King. Now, Bulang Bronzebeard led the dwarven elites to encircle the undead Nerub using the latest underground engineering equipment of the Alliance. It wasn't that Arthas didn't have the thought of killing Bulang. However, to create the more powerful Dragon Lich servant, he needed to do it himself. In the end, he gave up on going to Ajo-Nerub. "Damn big lizard, I wonder if you will still have the courage to fight when you see this thing?" Arthas's mutterings were destined not to be heard by Alexstrasza. On the Eastern Front, the alliance led by William quickly pushed forward after taking care of the Vrykul people. Now, they had already arrived at Zudak and were cleaning up the undead trolls. At the same time, in Order, the Alliance heroes had already killed their way into the front hall area. After eliminating the special boss, the Flame Behemoth, the remaining progenitor WRM's sharp scales were suppressed by Gavin Rad's wind sword. After being knocked to the ground, it was forcefully locked to the ground and beaten up. Ignis the Furnace Keeper was a little like the Flame Guardian Corellon in Alkavon's treasury. In a sense, it was a copy of him. However, this time, it wasn't just one hero that fought Ignis, but more than 20. The XT-002 dismantle that was guarding the checkpoint was also unable to withstand the attack of the Beast's alliance and quickly fell. While Gerben was working hard on how to restore the flame behemoth for his own use, Duque was interested in studying the XT-002 dismantle that had been destroyed in the city wall area. Technology couldn't be improved in a single leap. No matter how good the technology was, it had to have a sufficient industrial foundation. This was like taking an AK-47 mold back to the primitive era and preparing to mass-produce AK-47s to conquer the wilderness. Suddenly, you discovered that you still needed lathes, assembly lines to produce bullets, gunpowder, various metal mines, and smelters. The current technological development of the Alliance was very uneven. They had unscientific things like flying battleships and cannons that were close to the level of Earth's World War II, but they couldn't make a rifle that was at the level of World War II. They couldn't even make a clumsy rifle like Mozingana. Basically, they were stuck in two areas, steelmaking and the lack of fine processing ability. Most of the time, they could only use thicker parts to make up for the lack of details. But the XT-002 dismantle was different. This was an unscientific robot powered by Titan energy that was close to being an arcane type. The arcane puppets that filled the streets of New Silvermoon could be said to be a weaker version of it. Elven craftsmen with casting abilities had spent thousands of years, but they had only managed to remake the most of it. That was why they were called arcane puppets and not arcane robots. It was because they lacked the crucial self-control, enemy tracking system, enemy judgment, and the ability to use firepower to respond. Duque wasn't a programmer. He couldn't make up a program out of thin air. If he was given a ready-made example and asked to modify it, he might actually have a chance. On this day, everyone saw Mark Dooku holding the core of the XT-002 dismantle with all 10 of his fingers. He didn't move, didn't say a word, and looked like a stone statue. The 3 members of the Iron Parliament in the front hall had been defeated. The giants Kalangan and Wiria had been defeated. Only then, in Karazhan, did Duque's eyes suddenly emit a sharp light. Done. Done. Chapter 1612. In Torim's storm temple, Torim's huge body was pacing back and forth. Beside him, Archivan and the other 4 watchers quietly leaned against a huge pillar of the temple, not saying a word. They were all waiting for news from Oder. No one knew Oder's defense better than Torim, the Guardian. If everything was normal with Oder, it would be an absolute defense that would make any mortal in the world despair. Even if Oder's defense was greatly weakened due to Yogg-Saron's erosion, it was not something an ordinary team of powerhouses could handle. Torim, what's the hurry? There are still 23 hours, 22 minutes, and 11 seconds until the agreed time, Archavon said coldly. Sigh. I know. I just can't calm down. Even if Odin and Tyr are missing, Loken has been destroyed, and I deliberately did not care, letting the Watchers fight on their own, but that is still. Torim stomped his feet, surrounded by wind and lightning. All your worries, please wait until after the agreed time. We are now asking for help from the most powerful mortal team in all of Azeroth. They are blessed by the Star Soul and have the possibility of approaching the limit of the planet's capacity. Since they killed Thun, we should believe that they will not be killed by those who are not qualified enough. It should be said that as the Rock Watcher, Archavon's temperament was the calmest. In contrast, Torim, who had the characteristics of a storm, could not stay calm. At this moment, Torim suddenly turned around. On the platform outside the Storm Temple, a portal opened with a whoosh. Peerless powerhouses with powerful auras stepped out from it one after another. The leader was naturally Duque, and behind him were Onyxia, Vashch, and the newly promoted demigods Sylvanas Windrunner. Almost at the same time that he noticed their arrival, Torim rushed over with the 4 watchers. When the 5 supergiants ran, the earth shook and the mountains shook. Duque smiled bitterly. Before he could do anything, Queen Sylvanas snapped her fingers, and a gentle tornado lifted the 4 of them up. It felt extremely soft and a little weird, as if they were being held up by a thick ball of cotton. Duque praised, I didn't expect your understanding of the wind to increase again. Of course. Queen Sylvia puffed out her chest proudly. How did you? Halfway through his sentence, Tarim suddenly looked surprised. The front has been cleared? Duque's face was filled with pride. Do you really think our team's achievements are just boasting? Tarim was a little embarrassed and didn't know how to respond. In the past 25,000 years, it had been a complete joke for a mortal to challenge a demigod. In that era where astral souls had yet to awaken, all levels were firmly solidified. In order to break through the limits of mortals and reach a higher level, one needed talent, hard work, and absolute luck. In a sense, the High Elves had brought Sargeras in because they hated the barrier of power and crazily pursued higher levels of power. Even if Azeroth's Star Soul was aware of the impending danger and let go of the restrictions of mortals, it still wouldn't be possible to achieve victory in all the battles from Archimonde to Ragnaros, to Nefarian, to See, Thun, to Kill, Jaden, and so on. This wasn't something that could be achieved through luck alone. Tarim, who had always been dismissive of the outside world, finally began to take the power of mortals seriously at this moment. Tarim knelt on one knee, lowered his huge head, and looked at Duque at eye level. Next, it's our turn, right? Duque nodded. Yes. The puppet avatar I sent into Odor has already investigated, and Yogg-Saron's state is not complete. If we are fast enough, we can wake up your colleagues, and then gather the Alliance heroes and all the demigod-level combat power that can be mobilized to deal with Yogg-Saron. Duque's words made Tarim a little excited. When Duque first followed him to Loken's temple, he was full of pessimism. At that point in time, in his opinion, there was nothing that could save Odor's fall. For the sake of his dead wife's blood feud, for the sake of his own duty, he was prepared to fight Loken with all his might. Now, the situation had been greatly reversed. The addition of Alkavon's 4 guardians had greatly increased the strength of the guardians. If the 4 of them fought alone, none of them would be a match for Tarim. If 2 of them fought together, it would be very difficult for Tarim. If 3 of them fought together, Tarim would definitely lose. If the 4 of them fought together, Tarim would definitely kneel. With them, in addition to the 4 demigods on Duke's side, Tarim was now full of confidence. All right, Duque, we'll all listen to your arrangements. Tarim took the initiative to relinquish command. Although this was an agreement, without the outstanding performance of the Alliance's hero squad, Tarim would probably have some doubts. Duque did not argue. He directly spread out Odor's map and announced, there are only 3 leaders left in the Guardian Temple area. They are Freya, who was originally in charge of the Temple of Life, Hodier, who was in charge of the Temple of Winter, and Mimiron, the Master Craftsman. Of course, to prevent Yogg-Saron's lackey, General Vizax, from rushing over from the higher levels of the Stairway of Madness, we must also make arrangements. Duque first pointed to the entrance of the Stairway of Madness and the Guardian Temple area. Alkavon, I'll leave this to the 4 of you. Until we fight the other guardians and let them regain their sanity, I'll have to trouble you to defend. Alkavon let out a rumbling sound. He patted his rock-solid chest. Leave it to us. Duque then pointed to the right side of the map. Hodier, who controls the power of winter. Onyxia and Vashj, you 2 are in charge. All right, the 2 girls said in unison. As for Freya, who controls the power of life, leave it to Tarim and Servanas. I hope you 2 can use violent attacks to directly destroy Freya's defense. All right. No problem. Anyone who controlled the natural life element was famous for being able to wear down their energy consumption. Without a strong enough attack, it would be a never-ending battle of attrition if they broke through her defense in one go. Letting Tarim and Servanas deal with Freya was also a risky strategy. Duque believed that they could do it well. As for me and the Alliance heroes, we'll focus our strength on dealing with Mimiron. At this point, Duque's eyes shone with an intriguing light. That's right. He was tempted. Because be it the flaming behemoth XT002 disassembler, or even the mechanical guards of the entire city wall area, they were all Mimiron's masterpiece. Chapter 1613. Who is Mimiron? the great inventor who had been in the ruins of the Titans, the great mechanic, the creator of all kinds of Odor's black technology. The tens of thousands of mechanical creations in Odor's city wall area were all his handiwork. It was no exaggeration to say that he was an army, and an army that was constantly evolving. Looking back at the Alliance's current technology, although it was the result of Duque's instilling of black technology, it was the great gnome craftsman Gerben who had been continuously implementing Duque's ideas and principles. In that case, Mimiron was Odor's Gerben. No, he was even above Gerben. After all, Gerben hadn't mastered mass production and automated production technology. This was a comprehensive awareness from individual invention to assembly line production. In the Alliance, Gerben was mostly in charge of cannons and prototypes of new equipment, and Magni was in charge of mass production. The most important thing was that Mimiron wasn't a living thing. He was a Titan creation whose soul had been infused into a gnome-shaped robot. This guy could stay awake 24 hours a day and tinker with inventions day and night. Could a gnome like Gerben do it? He wouldn't be able to hold on after 2 or 3 days of cultivation. If he forced himself to hold on, he might just die. Therefore, Duque came to the conclusion that Mimiron was even more awesome. This time, he had come to Odor to kidnap Mimiron no matter what. Torim couldn't understand the despicable thoughts of a gentleman, fake, Duque at all. He even let out a long sigh of relief. The few Guardians had known each other for 25,000 years, and it could be said that they knew each other very well. In a situation where they didn't have the home advantage, Torim wasn't afraid of anyone. Mimiron wasn't the same. Although this mechanical gnome was also a Guardian-level high-ranking servant, he didn't have a temple of his own. With the title of invention, he only had his own workshop. In the endless years, he used practice to verify his fantastic ideas that the other Guardians couldn't even catch up to. The other Guardians might be strong, but their growth and power had already reached the end. But this mechanical gnome seemed to be forever standing at the starting point. In the beginning, Odor didn't have the so-called city wall area. There were so many crazy things in the city wall area, and they were all created by Mimiron over the long years. Even Torim himself felt threatened by those terrifying steel beasts. Now that Duque had volunteered to deal with Mimiron, who was controlled by Yogg-Saron, Torim felt very comfortable. After the arrangements were made, a great battle that could affect the entire situation in Azeroth finally began. In the Stairway of Madness area of Odor, a giant humanoid creature with a green background suddenly raised its head. He had an appearance that greatly affected the appearance of the city. Although he was humanoid, he only had 4 limbs and a head. Behind him was a pair of so-called wings, which were 3 pairs of green legs that curved downwards like crab feet. Almost every curve had a green, yellow, thorn-like 4-cornered awl. He had a round, thick, green armored body that looked a bit like the shell of a crab. As for the green arms, they were standard crab pincers, but they were thicker. When the pincers were closed, they could be used as spikes. If one looked closely, they could see that there were 2 curled-up spiked tentacles around his waist. It was extremely ugly. His lower body also gave off a bulky feeling. It was a thick leg with only 3 toes, thicker than an elephant's leg. There was also a short and thick tail that shrunk bit by bit, as if it was pieced together from shells of different sizes. He was General Wyzax, one of the most powerful faceless created by the ancient gods. He guarded Yogg-Saron's prison to ensure that no one could disturb Yogg-Saron's recovery. He could ignore the small mortals in the city wall area and the front hall. At this time, the foreign enemies led by Torim were invading on a large scale, which obviously triggered his nerves. Mortals were destined to be unable to see this scene with the naked eye. At this moment, a huge hole was suddenly torn open in Odor's spatial barrier. Even at the moment the hole was torn open, General Wyzax had already activated countermeasures in an attempt to forcibly close the hole. Unfortunately, it was destined to be ineffective. At the same time that Titan gave the 6 high-ranking Guardians a mission, he also gave them absolute permission to enter. In the next second, the entire spatial crack began to expand rapidly. A thunderous force swayed in the void, and the entire outer space of the Temple Guardian area echoed with Torim's thunderous voice. Yogg-Saron. I, Tarim, have returned. 4 Titans mission, to suppress you, the evil god that corrupts the planet. Despicable invaders. General Wyzax raised his face that resembled a squirrel lizard and roared, "Don't you understand even now? Only the great ancient god, Yogg-Saron, is the eternal ruler of this world." With that, the shadow of General Wyzax, which was at least 100 times larger, appeared directly above the Temple Guardian area. He swung his giant illusory pincer that was more than 300 meters long and smashed it hard at Tarim, who was leading the way. Tarim, who was originally 10 stories tall, instantly turned himself into a purple thunderbolt. With lightning speed, he made 2 consecutive 90-degree turns, dodged the first strike of the giant pincer, and slammed into the body of the green monster in midair. General Wyzax's projection opened his pair of giant pincers crazily, revealing the sharp and hard sawteeth on the pincer's mouth. He retracted the pincer that blasted out, and the pincer on the side of his body bit out like a dragon's mouth, attempting to pincer the smaller Tarim from the front and back. Duque thought that Tarim would dodge. Who knew that he would not move, not evade, and let the 2 giant pincers clamp down on his body. Even the full-force bombardment of the fortress main cannon might not be able to break the Guardian's defense. Under such an attack, the Guardian's body was like a thin layer of paper, instantly falling apart. Feeling Tarim's rapidly declining momentum, Duque almost thought that Tarim was bragging for a moment. But in the next blink of an eye, Tarim's body underwent a drastic change. The lightning that flowed out of his exploded body was like silver blood, spraying towards the shadow of General Wyzax. The blood was like a giant hammer, smashing into the waist of the green monster's shadow, pushing it back. Before anyone else could react, the flowing light that Tarim emitted had already enveloped all the invaders. After another second, Duque and the others suddenly found themselves in the Guardian Temple area that was magnificently decorated and had a huge and towering porch. "This is..." Queen, she let out a sleepy voice. Chapter 16:14. Should I say, as expected of the Yogg-Saron, that even the Titans couldn't completely destroy back then? Tarim smiled bitterly, and a knowing smile appeared on his face. "I was tricked a little. Fortunately, I still sent you in." The 10-story-tall Tarim had a huge body, so any change on his face, any change in expression, could be seen clearly by Duque and the others. Now, Tarim's body exuded an indescribable dark light. The color on the surface of Tarim's skin darkened, as if the radiance of life and soul had faded. He raised his right palm, flipped it up and down, and looked at it carefully. Unsure if it was an illusion, Duque suddenly felt that the water in the river of time was flowing through the fingers that had become a little withered. Tarim was like a huge statue that had been weathered and eroded in the desert for thousands of years. He was decaying at a speed visible to the naked eye, but he seemed to be unaware of it as he laughed wildly. "Haha, what a shame. A dignified guardian can't perform the duties of a guardian." Tarim knelt on one knee, not out of etiquette or respect, but simply out of weakness. Tarim lowered his head. "Duke Marcus, can I trust you?" Duque looked serious and took a firm step forward. The relationship between the Guardians of Azeroth has long gone beyond trust. This is the mission that history has given us. Tarim was slightly stunned, and then immediately smiled. "Yes, this is our mission." After saying that, his huge finger pointed in the direction of Duque. "This is..." Duque and Queen Sylvanas were shocked at the same time. If, as history had developed, Tarim had been caught and brainwashed. Even if the Allied army used the Old Fist to educate him on Azeroth doctrine, it would at most give the players a 10% increase in attack power. That would be all. But now, a complete set of Wind Titan runic magic circle. It was not a gift, it was purely a loan. In the Sea of Consciousness, Tarim indicated that he would temporarily lend it to Duque and Queen Sylvanas for 3 days. As long as enough wind elements were injected, they could activate the corresponding Titan's wind and thunder magic. This was the original wind magic that was perfectly compatible with the world of Azeroth. Without the user, even if Tarim was killed, these complex runic magic circles would dissipate on the spot along with the death of the guardian. If one had to put a price on these runes, it would be priceless. Although it was for 3 days, as long as one had the ability to remember the rune arrangement and the pattern of changes within, even if Torim took it back after 3 days, it would still be able to greatly improve Duque's control over the wind element. Of course, for a shameless person with a system elf, this was a 100% success in stealing. On the surface, Duque was a true saint. Then I'll borrow it. In his heart, Duque didn't feel guilty at all. After all, in his opinion, this was the reward Torim had entrusted him to save Oder. As for whether or not the Titans would come knocking on his door to ask for it back, the Titans would already have their physical bodies turned to dust. At that time, the Titans, who only had their souls left, would even complain about the slow transfer of power, so why would they ask Duque for it back? Beside him, Sylvanas closed her eyes and immersed herself in this wonderful experience. It didn't take long, about half a minute. When she opened her eyes again, there was a faint flash of lightning in the depths of her eyes. Queen Sylvanas said to Duque in an extremely calm tone, "Duque, I want to challenge Freya alone." Duque shrugged. "Actually, I think you can remove the word want. You've already decided." Queen Sylvanas rolled her eyes. "Please, I'm asking for your opinion at least. If you're adamant about it, I'll give up." Duque looked at the person beside him and put his hands on her extremely flexible shoulders. "From the first day I met you, I knew that you were destined to break through the storm and soar into the sky, not a canary willing to exchange singing and beautiful feathers for human protection in a cage. So when it comes to challenging yourself, as long as you remember me, your sisters, and your compatriots, and do what you can." Sylvanas' mouth wriggled for a moment, and finally all the words she wanted to say turned into one sentence: "I will." Then, she once again gave Duque a charming and determined back view that gradually faded into the distance. She was clearly not a stalwart person, but she had the courage to bear the future of millions of her fellow elves. There were only a few people in the world who had this heroic spirit. Duque suddenly smiled bitterly. "I can clearly rely on my looks to make a living, but I have to rely on my strength." In the Guardian's shrine area, nearly a quarter of the way to the north was a huge courtyard, which was shaded by trees. There were 2 large lakes, one in the south and one in the north, and connecting the 2 lakes was a beautiful river. That was the greenhouse of life where the goddess of life, Freya, was. This greenhouse was so huge, with huge trees that seemed to reach the sky, and flowers that were exaggerated to the size of a house. Freya, who was a full 10 stories tall, did not seem out of place in the slightest. Originally, Freya was walking slowly inside, wandering around the lake, listening to the sounds of all kinds of life. Suddenly, the female giant's expression changed. She watched with a look of extreme surprise as an arrow flew towards her. This arrow pierced through like a meteor from outer space, easily penetrating the layers of green light that permeated the atmosphere of the greenhouse, and went straight for her. Could it be Torim? The surprised Silver Lady quickly turned into a scream. There was no way for her huge body to dodge. No, her shoulders seemed to be sucked in, and the sharp arrow that contained the supreme law of lightning almost pierced through her chest. However, at the last moment, she used her own law of life to counteract the gravitational force, which allowed her to squat down suddenly and barely avoid the dangerous arrow that hit her vitals. Even so, from the big charred hole on her left collarbone, one could still see what was behind. Her body had been completely pierced through. The greenhouse of life, which was filled with birdsong and fragrant flowers, suddenly fell silent with Freya's scream. Only a faint circle of lightning clouds was left in front of them, and the clouds gave the air a burning smell. In the next moment, the green fog was blown away by a gust of wind. Only a small and well-proportioned female figure was left standing on the green hillside at the southern gate. Her figure was obviously so small, but in Freya's eyes, she seemed to be taller than all the guardians. Purely because of that blow. Freya's expression became a little abnormal, and the lightning at the wound was still stimulating Freya's nerves. Perhaps, for a brave warrior, this was nothing. But Freya stared at the female figure with a bitter and hateful gaze as if her parents had died. No, it was as if her ancestors' graves had been dug out. Who, you? The high-pitched voice was full of sorrow. Chapter 1615. Sylvanas Windrunner, the demigod of Azeroth. Queen Sylvanas' every word was like a howling wind, lightning, and thunder, containing the divine aura of the wind element. Demigod? Freya's expression was puzzled, then furious. Indigenous demigod. Do you know what you've done? Not only did you call yourself a god in front of the servants of the great master Yogg-Saron, but you also stole the power of thunder that belonged to the master. Taurym is an existence that should have become the master's servant. What did you do to him? After a pause, Freya erupted with her greatest anger. The most important things, you actually injured the perfect me. Upon hearing this, Duque, who was spying on them through the mage's eyes, opened his mouth so wide that a duck's egg could be stuffed in it. Eh? Sister Freya, did you read the wrong script? In Duque's impression of Freya, she was definitely not like this. But Duque immediately realized something. Yogg-Saron was also an expert at brainwashing. Its brainwashing was not as rough as End-Zoth's. End-Zoth drove Neltharion crazy with the incessant murmurs of the ancient gods, then infused it with loyalty to End-Zoth. Yogg-Saron, on the other hand, was different. It was more like injecting more irrelevant information and then slowly replacing the key content in the victim's subconscious, such as changing the Guardian's allegiance from the Titan to Yogg-Saron. If there was no mistake in the calculation, Yogg-Saron in this life should have injected some annoying thinking into Freya. Shameless. Accompanied by Freya's roar, the wound pierced by Sylvanas' arrow suddenly healed perfectly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Not even the slightest scar was left. At the same time, the greenhouse of life changed. The three towering trees began to move, transforming from giant trees into humanoid creatures. When they lifted their feet, they lifted their thick, long legs full of roots. When they waved their hands, they lifted their thick arms that could be used as the main beam of the main hall. They were none other than the three ancient trees Duque had mentioned in the report: Bright Leaf, Iron Branch, and Elder Stone Bark Ancient Tree. Not only the three of them, but many other flowers and plants also had their own mobility. They pulled out thick roots from the grass that they were rooted in, and those were their legs. However, their appearances were still unflattering. There was a swift whipper, with 4 petals on its head and 2 thorny arms that looked like a man-eating flower. There was a explosive whipper that could self-destruct and was as powerful as a 203mm naval cannon. There was also a ancient water elemental that looked like a standard ancient water elemental. A large number of plants and water elemental creatures easily formed an army and swarmed towards Sylvanas. Hee. Queen Sylvie let out a disdainful chuckle. Sure enough, unlimited regeneration is shameless. In a sense, this method of constantly recruiting underlings and drowning the opponent with a sea of plants was really a counter to most teams that lacked defensive power. Wind, it suddenly began to blow. 2 small tornadoes pushed against Queen Sylvie's combat boots, causing her 2 long legs to dangle in the air. In the next second, Queen Sylvie flew up. This time, most of Freya's plant army could only watch helplessly. Except for a few dark purple humanoid plants with long-range attack power, they were the Storm Whipper that could release storm arrows. When Queen Sylvanas saw the sparse lightning arrows shooting into the air and attacking her, her sneer grew louder. Freya, don't you think you're underestimating me too much? Do you think this kind of attack will work? After saying that, Queen Sylvie snapped her fingers, and the lightning arrows flying towards her stopped in midair as if they had been hit by a spell that stopped time. They turned around on the spot and shot towards the huge elder tree, Bright Leaf. Boom boom boom. The elder tree's bright green branches and leaves were blasted into charcoal in large swathes. The lightning strike even ignited a fire that quickly spread on the crown of Elder Tree Leaf. Ah, Bright Leaf screamed. Fear of fire was a common problem for plants. Queen Sylvie was amused to see the Elder Tree Leaf, who was 5 or 6 stories tall, rush to the river, kneel down, and stick its burning crown and back into the river. Then, a certain misguided queen shot a fire arrow at elder tree leaves upturned, but Freya did not directly heal her subordinates. It would be a waste of divine power to save a flammable elder tree leaf when it was on fire. She chose to attack Sylvanas directly. She raised her right arm high and shouted, "Life needs sunlight." In the void above the greenhouse of life, something like a portal suddenly opened. In the next moment, a thick beam of sunlight with a diameter of at least 20 meters fell silently towards the place where Queen Sylvie was a second ago. The sun was beautiful. The sun could be seen from afar but not touched up close. Sunlight maintained a certain temperature and intensity could promote the growth of all things. However, sunlight that was too intense would evaporate all water and even burn everything it came into contact with. In the blink of an eye, a terrible black cylinder appeared where Queen Sylvie was a second ago. That was the result of the excessively blazing sunlight burning everything inside. If Queen Sylvie had not dodged at the last moment with her high speed, she might have been a charred corpse. Beads of sweat rolled down Queen Sylvie's forehead. She began to comfort herself. This move is a bit disgusting. Fortunately, the element I control is wind. Sylvanas, you can do it. Carefully sense the fire element in the atmosphere, and at the most intense moment, turn into wind and thunder and dodge. In terms of strength, even if Freya's strength had been reduced after being brainwashed, she was still not an existence that Sylvanas could just kill. Fighting the strong as the weak could indeed sharpen her abilities. A true strong person not only knew themselves, but also their enemy. Sylvanas, who had just entered the divine realm, had used this method to grow rapidly like a sponge absorbing water. After she dodged Freya's first sunlight, Freya immediately changed her strategy. She raised her hands and shouted, "The earth needs sunlight. Sunlight illuminates the earth." This move really frightened Queen Sylvie. A move that did not exist in the intelligence reports was the best test of a strong person's reflexes and judgment. In less than a second, Freya's whole body was bathed in a golden glow, as if she had turned into the most blazing sun, pouring the dazzling sunlight into the huge greenhouse that was only 10 square kilometers in size. Chapter 1616. What? Duque, who was secretly watching the battle, was a little confused on the spot. Freya was a standard Logia, and the basic element she controlled should be earth. Why did it suddenly become fire? For a moment, Duque's heart was in his throat. Sylvanas was a typical high attack and high agility, and this characteristic could not be changed after stepping into the divine realm. She was least afraid of the kind of powerful, single-target attacks. On the contrary, she was at a disadvantage against this kind of unreasonable, all-seeing, and indiscriminate elemental attack. But the next moment, Duque was happy. Because he had already found Queen Sylvanas's breath on the back of one of the Treant elders. Rustle, squeak, squeak. Just like in the desert, only coniferous plants survived. After being baked by the excessive strong light and sunlight, the water stored in the plants' bodies evaporated in an instant. Most of these huge living trees and plants withered under Freya's attack. Only the 3 Treant elders, who had the largest physiques and were also the strongest, survived. The clever Queen Sylvanas took advantage of this. She directly concealed most of her breath and hid on the back of Elder Stone skin. When the Treant realized something was wrong, Queen Sylvanas had already kicked off with her long legs and took off again. "Don't think this is the end," Freya roared. This time, the female giant knelt on one knee and pressed her palms on the ground. The water of the only 2 lakes in the greenhouse of life suddenly rose 100 meters and turned into 2 huge fountains, sprinkling dew like water droplets on every inch of the scorched ground in the greenhouse. The lush, tender green gas seemed to spread endlessly in the greenhouse. Pitter-patter. It was a magnificent scene of the seemingly dead, scorched land once again being occupied by life. The ground was cracking, and thick shoots drilled out of the cracks, from the most ordinary grass to a huge flower as tall as a person, and then to new trees that required 5 people to barely hug. Within the field of vision, all the plants were growing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Crack, crack. The layer of scorched black on the surface was like a camouflage shell. The charred branches of each plant burst open, and new buds grew thicker and stronger. The thorn guard from before started to bare its fangs and brandish its claws again. In the short span of a dozen breaths, the army of plants that had been scorched by the terrifying sunlight reappeared. Servanas frowned slightly, his beautiful and long golden eyebrows clearly trembling. Then she smiled. She stood in the air and drew her longbow elegantly. A clear and lofty female voice resounded throughout the battlefield. "The army on the other side, you have been surrounded by me, Sylvanus Windrunner. If you don't want to die, put down your weapons and surrender." Freya was dumbfounded by this extremely contradictory sentence. The last word that came out of the giant's mouth was, arrogant. Arrogant? Perhaps. However, if one did not even dare to think about it, then there would be no progress in this world. In any conflict, both sides would announce their ranks, and that would determine the victor. At this moment, Freya was trying to spawn a huge forest and completely occupy all the space in the greenhouse of life. In the fierce wind, Solidar Wrath of the Stars had already been drawn, and countless starlight turned into short and narrow arrows of light, pouring out of the gorgeous longbow. The starlight mixed with the lightning of thunder, and the arrows shot out were like thousands of lightning snakes, connecting the body of the divine longbow with each victim. The huge petals were shot by the lightning arrows, bursting into countless withered leaves surrounded by lightning. The fierce thorns were easily torn into hundreds of thousands of pieces by the raging waves of lightning, and scattered with the wind like broken cotton. The focus of the attack was naturally on the 3 Treant elders. The first to be knocked down was Bright Leaf, and the arrows brought with them a strong wind blew off all the leaves on its body, whether it was the burnt black leaves or the fresh green leaves. What was even more terrifying was the power of lightning that continuously zigzagged over the entire tree. The ultra-high-pressure lightning directly destroyed every vein in the trunk and caused a fire. With all the water in the greenhouse being used by Freya to irrigate the land, there was no water to put out the fire this time. Moreover, ordinary fire could not extinguish such a lightning fire. Since ancient times, there had been many forest fires caused by lightning striking down trees in the sky and causing fires. Servanas's lightning had a similar principle. Even though Fafnir used sand as a fire-extinguishing prop and rolled up waves of sand to cover Elder Brightleaf's body, it still could not stop new flames from bursting out from the thick trunk. Elder Brightleaf could be said to have been burned alive. "No," Freya screamed loudly. With the first came the second. As Servanas flew in midair, he shot the ancient iron branch tree elder's 72 lightning arrows, stirring up the elemental veins within its bark, directly igniting it into a large human-shaped torch. "No, no, no!" Freya kept slapping the ground, urging the trees to grow even faster to fill up all the space in the huge greenhouse that was nearly 200 meters high, cutting and compressing the space for Queen Sylvanas to move around. However, all her strength and urging came to an abrupt end when the trees grew to take up half the space in the greenhouse. "Why?" The female giant guardian's face was clearly blank. She turned her head in shock and looked at the last elder stone bark that had accompanied her for countless years. She was extremely sad to find that the elder tree had actually fallen. The huge elder tree had died, having lost all water and nutrients. Like the dead trees that had their roots eaten away by worms and fallen to the ground, there was no longer a trace of life. It had not fallen by Servanas's hands, but by Freya's urging of the earth and the entire space. In the air, the proud voice of Queen Sylvanas came again, supported by the wind. "Freya, you have lost." "No. I have not lost. I am the guardian of the Church of Life. How can I lose to simple violence? The earth bears all things, the earth gives birth to all things. I cannot lose to a mere demigod of wind and thunder like you." Queen Sylvanas shook her head. "If you were standing on real earth, or if you were in your Church of Life, I would definitely be no match for you. Unfortunately, you can only control the power of the earth of a mere greenhouse of life at the moment. Then, your defeat is inevitable." As her voice fell, Servanas drew his bow and nocked an arrow. Behind him, the mysterious Titan runes suddenly appeared, forming a magic circle that expanded from the inside to the outside. The elements of the wind elemental realm were constantly crossing the void and pouring into the artifact longbow in Servanas' hand. The power of stars, wind, and thunder mixed and blended on this gorgeous longbow, finally forming a long purple-blue arrow. It was more like a spear than an arrow. With a length of more than 2 meters, it was beyond the scope of an arrow. Freya, you should wake up. Chapter 16-17. The arrow was so long that it exceeded the general concept of an arrow. Normally, only a ballista could control such a long and huge arrow. Servanas had a good idea. She skillfully performed the golden rooster standing on one leg, stretching out her slender legs to hold the arm guard of Solidar's Wrath of the Stars. Due to the maximum strength, the streamlined muscles on her arms bulged slightly, and she pulled the bowstring. It was just a low shout, but it sounded like a spring thunder. Thousands of lightning shadows were triggered, and the next moment, the entire greenhouse of life was filled with the buzzing sound of thunder and lightning. Freya was stunned for a moment, and found that she seemed to have been struck by thousands of lightning bolts. This was an illusion brought about by the trance. Her senses had been completely blinded, and she did not notice that an illusory lightning pattern extended from the front of Servanas' bow to her forehead. Two very strange sounds. It was Freya's scream of being hit by the arrow, followed by the sound of the wind and thunder arrow breaking through the wind. Even Servanas herself did not know if the arrow just now exceeded the speed of sound. She only knew that she had hit the target. She had shot her target perfectly. The sharp arrowhead pierced the Titan Guardian's brow, and most of the thunder arrow was deeply embedded in the forehead. From the beginning to the end, Servanas had never thought of killing Freya completely. He had to deal enough damage to wake the other party up, but at the same time, he couldn't be too heavy-handed and kill the other party directly. This was a skill, especially in a situation where Servanas didn't have any kind of blunt weapon to attack. Now it seemed that the effect was good. The thunder arrow acted as a lightning rod. Queen Sylvanas' fingers were connected to the void, and she focused more on transferring the power of thunder from the wind elemental realm into Freya's brow. What the hell am I doing? No, you're a prisoner. Get out of my head. Master, I didn't mean to blaspheme your name. What? Not only did Freya cover her head in pain, but she also tried to pluck Queen Sylvanas' tiny thunder arrow from her forehead. How could this be? Queen Sylvanas was also angry. She continued to raise her left hand high, and her 5 jade-like fingers continued to guide the lightning into Freya's head. Her right hand took out a lightning whip from thin air and lashed it at Freya again and again. Queen Sylvie, who was wearing boots, seemed to be the embodiment of lightning. Every move she made was surrounded by lightning. Stupid guardian, wake up right now. This scene was very strange. A tiny elf had whipped a 10-story tall female giant, causing her to roll on the ground, crushing the trees and charred wood that had stopped growing around her into smithereens. If Duque had the time to see this scene, he might be worried that Queen Sylvanas had awakened some strange attribute. Unfortunately, Duque was not free. In fact, after Queen Shi, Onyxia, and Vashj left, he became busy. Very simply, General Vezix was coming from the stairway of madness. As one of the best among the faceless, as the most loyal henchman of the ancient god Yogg-Saron, Vezix was clearly aware of the consequences of letting Duque and his group attack those unreliable guardians. He chose to take the initiative. In Duque's original plan, Archivon's 4 guardians would join forces to hold off Vezix. If possible, it would be a stalemate. They would drag Vezix until Duque defeated the remaining 3 guardians, and then gather all the strong to kill Yogg-Saron. There were 2 keys to this plan. First, General Vezix could not die. If he died early, just as Loken's death would attract the observer Orgarin, his death would definitely stimulate Yogg-Saron's early recovery. Being backstabbed by an ancient god before he could deal with the 3 guardians would really be the end of the game amidst the laughter and chatter. The second key was that Vezix could not interfere with their work of waking up the 3 guardians. What annoyed Duque was that something went wrong on the second point. Less than a minute after the three women left, General Vezix gave Duque a big fright. This huge humanoid monster draped in a crab shell did not come from the entrance of the Stairway of Madness to the Guardian's Temple area. Instead, it came with heavenly evil. Without any warning, the roof of the temple above Flame Watcher Corellon suddenly shattered. The general fell at a terrifying speed far beyond a freefall. The speed of an ICBM was not something a giant like Corellon could react to. Duque made a counterattack. It was the Titan lightning magic he had just gotten from Torim. This was the fastest magic Duque could release. However, as soon as the magic was released, Duque felt something was wrong. The elements around the general seemed to be forcibly pushed away. Even with Duque's demigod lightning magic, he felt sluggish, like a sharp knife stabbing into a paste. Duque's lightning still hit General Vezix, but the other party took it head-on. The general swung a house-sized, hammer-like pincer and smashed it on Corellon's head before he could raise his arms to form a defense. Ah! The Flame Watcher let out a furious howl. If he was a pure fire elemental creature, he could have laughed 3 times like Ragnaros and said, "Hit me all you want. I lose if I cry out in pain." Unfortunately, Corellon was a guardian giant, a special existence between a creature and an elemental creature. So even if Corellon tilted his head at the last moment, his entire right shoulder was still caved in. He was severely injured on the spot and could not get up. Facing the siege of the other 3 Titan Guardians, General Wyzax suddenly waved his huge arm, and a 100-meter-tall shadow elemental tide appeared behind him. With an extremely gorgeous cleave, he forcibly broke through the siege of the 3 Guardians and let out a burst of wild laughter. Ha! This is the territory of Master Yogg-Saron. Invaders! Suffer! Despair! Kneel before the great power of the Master. Vezix must have been injected with some kind of expired drug. Although he was behaving abnormally, no one knew how long his madness would last. Duke's face twitched as he clearly felt the dark energy that was centered around the general rejecting the entry of the 4 main elements. Of course, he knew that the general had a despair aura that could forcefully reduce the attack speed of all enemies in the field, as well as reduce mana regeneration throughout the entire process. But it was definitely not this powerful. This thing could almost be called a despair territory. Chapter 16-18. Did Torim not fall for the trap and get brainwashed? Was it Loken's earlier failure that stimulated Yogg-Saron? Or was it something else? Duque had no way of knowing. The only thing he was sure of was that General Wyzax was roaring like he was on steroids. Half of the 4 Guardians of the Treasure Vault were on their knees at the start. Although Corellon was trying hard to communicate with the Fire Elemental world and use the power of the Fire Elemental to repair his body, it would obviously take time. If Duque left to deal with Mimiron during this period, the 4 Guardians might all be on their knees in less than 10 minutes. There must be something wrong with the surrounding environment or something. Otherwise, there was no reason for such an abnormal difference in strength. Duque did not make another move. It was Blind Princess's 8 hits that he forced himself to make a move despite knowing that something was wrong. It had been a long time since Duque had faced such a formidable enemy. System Elf. Duque called his old partner in the Sea of Consciousness. Yo, dear host, I find that you always think of me when you're in trouble. I'm so sad. Duque's face darkened. Seeing that Duque was in a bad mood, the System Elf stopped joking. Okay, I'll stop teasing you. Substitute the data model and begin to analyze the environmental data. Perhaps this was the so-called fierce operation. It only took a second for the System Elf to give the answer. After incomplete analysis by the system, the surrounding space shows unstable half-space characteristics. No spatial interfaces of the 4 elemental realms have been detected within a radius of 200 meters. A large amount of biological tissue suspected to be the ancient god Yogg-Saron has been detected in the surrounding subspace crevices. It is the existence of these biological tissues that repel the entry of the 4 major elements. Wait, this was a little unpleasant. Duque's face was turning green. He suddenly thought of a possibility. Could they have been eaten by Yogg-Saron? Yogg-Saron was known as the Demon of 1,000 Throats or the Beast of 1,000 Throats. Legend had it that it had 1,000 mouths. Since it had 1,000 mouths, it had 1,000 esophagus. Regardless of whether it had 1,000 stomachs, staying in Yogg-Saron's body was definitely not a good thing. And speaking of Yogg-Saron's territory, one had to be reminded of the Great Brainwashing Method. This wasn't a move that could be dodged just by leaving the group and saving his IQ. Yogg-Saron could create different dreams and make its victims indulge in them. In the end, their worldview would be completely distorted, and they would be reduced to being its dog. Duque did not know how much consciousness Yogg-Saron had left here. If there was a lot of consciousness, even he might be in danger. This time, Duque's real body was participating in the battle. At this moment, the three blockheads once again charged forward bravely. The rock guardian Alcafen unleashed a powerful attack. His fist instantly doubled in size, and he probably gathered all of the earth elemental energy in this space into his hand. Then he fiercely smashed downwards. With a loud bang, the huge pincer on the right side of General Vezix turned from three-dimensional to two-dimensional, as thin as paper. Unfortunately, in the next second, the general used his left hand to slap the ice watcher, Turawan, who was next door. Something strange happened. The general's disintegrated right pincer quickly swelled back as if it was blown up, turning into a perfect pincer. This was not superficial work, but the hardness and toughness of the pincer had returned to its peak. This was because the general had used this recast pincer to fight fiercely with the storm watcher Amarin on the spot. What? Impossible? Several watchers exclaimed at the same time. Duque slapped his forehead. Did you forget the key point I told you? Turawan suddenly realized. Alcafen, you have the mark of the faceless on you. Get lost. Since Duque wanted them to block Vezix, he would naturally tell them the strategy. Only now did Duque realize that this was a bit too much. He did not know if it was a natural flaw when the Titans created these guardians, or if their brain circuits were different from humans. Once they encountered a situation they did not know, they would choose to use their best moves and skills to attack instead of carefully observing the situation. The mark of the faceless was one of the most special secret methods. When the general placed it on an enemy, the enemy would produce a curse that would cause special irresistible shadow damage to the people around them. Then this shadow power would return to Vezix's body after robbing the target's life force, repairing the damage. It had to be said that the general's mark was quite cunning. It was a serial trap. If the four watchers did not care, then the general was invincible. Just by relying on the mark, he could repair any injury on his body. He did not even need to attack. Just the damage from the mark could exhaust the other three watchers to death, and then he could fight Alcafen alone. What if he did? The watchers were all big giants, and Alcafen, who had the strongest defense, was excluded. The remaining two watchers were also very dangerous. In the end, one of the reasons was that the general had heavily injured the Flame Watcher, leaving the four watchers incomplete. Most importantly, Yogg-Saron seemed to have given Vezix a special power. Enough. There won't be any results if you keep fighting like this. Do you still remember our agreement? If you still want to fulfill your duty as a watcher, then run in 4 directions to the designated location and use the Titan rune chain to transfer the elements to me. Duque roared. Every watcher saw a shining virtual image of the Titan rune at the designated location, each representing the 4 elements of earth, water, fire, and wind in the Titan language. Needless to say, that was their location. Even though he was unwilling, even the injured Corellon began to run to the designated location. Intruders, your opponent is me. General Vezix roared in an incomparably domineering manner. With a leap slash, he pounced on the ice watcher Turawan. But just as he flew into the air, a golden arrow that exuded an incomparably powerful holy aura suddenly shot towards his head. Huh. Not knowing what it was, Vezix twisted his huge body in the air out of an instinctive aversion to holy power, so that his ugly face that looked like a windmill avoided the golden light. In the air, a small golden figure was suspended in the air. When the golden light returned to Duque's right hand, Vezix saw that it was actually a small spiral-shaped golden sword. Of course, in the size of a human, It was a long sword. Substitute, Vezix. From this moment on, your opponent is me, Duke Marcus. Chapter 1619. Plans could not keep up with changes. This was Duque's biggest feeling. Since the four wardens couldn't handle General Vizax, Duque could only roll up his sleeves and do it himself. The original version of Despair Aura reduced attack speed and blocked most mana regeneration methods. Now, the strengthened Despair Domain was even more powerful. It directly sealed the four elemental realms and Azeroth in this area. Ever since Duque mastered the 100 Hands battle technique, he had relied on massive amounts of magic power to replenish himself, replacing quality with quantity and stacking his enemies to death. Of course, it was great to be able to fight against thousands of enemies with an unlimited supply of mana. By cutting off the element's realm, General Vizax had forced Duque to a dead end. At this moment, Duque finally realized that he had a serious flaw. His upper limit of mana was still not high enough. Normally, he had the four major elemental realms and the weave to replenish his mana, so of course he didn't feel anything. Now that the other party had even temporarily cut off Duque's connection to the weave, Duque had almost suffered a setback. Fortunately, Duque had a plan B. When the four watchers ran in four different directions, the general could only watch helplessly. As a super powerhouse who could attack from both close and long range, the general did not lack long-range attacks. Unfortunately, his real killer move still relied on the shadow energy when Tide of Darkness was activated to increase his close-range attack power. In this state, because of the overload of shadow energy in his body, his movement speed was greatly reduced. He wanted to stop the four watchers, but Duque made his move. Hola, 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 hola. At this moment, Duque seemed to have been possessed by a certain Jiro. As he swung his fists continuously, every punch brought with it a loud sound like a sonic boom. They were fists formed by arcane impact. However, it was definitely not a normal punch, because every time the arcane energy struck the giant ugly face of the general, the next arcane energy would follow the trajectory of the previous punch. Not only was this the superposition of arcana technique energy, but it was also the best use of arcana technique energy. Magic released by ordinary powerhouses would dissipate on the spot after hitting the enemy. Duque wasn't. Almost every drop of arcane energy contained Duque's will, or the control of the system elf. After the attack on General Vizax, the energy did not dissipate immediately or disintegrate by the Despair realm. When the next attack came, these energy clusters would be attracted to each other like magnets, and once again, they would be attached to the new attack and hit the general twice, thrice, or even countless times. Although it looked like he was attacking mindlessly, in fact, it was more like he was driving a pile, repeatedly bombarding the same point. Without a choice, the general, who was already a bit dizzy from Duque's continuous attacks, raised its massive pincers, entering a defensive stance for the first time. Do you think this is the end? In a flash, Duque appeared behind the general. He crossed his arms and looked solemn. When he slashed out with both hands, two sharp white lights shot out from his hand blades. It was an attack aimed at the weak spot between the general's two crab pincers and elbows. Duque didn't have Alcafon's ability to gather the power of the earth and then strike down with an unstoppable destructive force. Duque's magic, on the other hand, was more targeted. When Duque poured out the magic in his body's eye circuit, the damage caused was even more astonishing. Two sharp 5-meter-long icicles appeared out of thin air and fiercely pierced the crab pincers from the elbow joint. Ah! General Vizax screamed. He found that the nerves in his hand had been completely destroyed by Duque's attack just now. No longer caring about anything else, the general's body suddenly bloomed with a blazing flame, splashing toward the audience. Burning flame. Normally, this terrifying flame would engulf the audience and indiscriminately attack everyone except the general. The funny thing was that the general was probably anxious. Or perhaps, this arrogant faceless simply didn't care about what kind of existence this little demigod was? Haha. In this world, there are probably only 3 or 4 guys who dare to set fire in front of me. Unfortunately, You're not one of them. Duque couldn't stop laughing. The fire of the Balrog Ragnaros was close to the origin of the fire elemental world. Duque couldn't handle it. Jidden the Deceiver's hellfire contained the Burning Legion's unique dark energy seasoning. Even Duque couldn't handle it. But for an amateur demigod monster to want to play with fire in front of Duque, that would be ridiculous. The flames that were sent out were skewed at a speed visible to the naked eye. With the general as the center, almost half a circle of flames near Duque were all sucked in by Duque like a whale sucking water. The flames that should have covered the sky and raged the audience were highly condensed in Duque's palm in 2 breaths, turning into a fireball the size of a rubber ball. It was just that the brightness of the fireball was 100 times greater than the original flames. Although it was not as bright as the sun, in the eyes of the general, it was almost the same as the sun. The amount of fire elements that were really sucked in by him was not much. In fact, it was not 100% under his control. It was just that after being injected with Duque's own fire elements, this super-concentrated fire elemental ball completely became Duque's slave. At this moment, Duque wondered if he was holding a small nuclear reactor in his hand. Yo, I'll pay you back double. Duque couldn't stop laughing. The next second, a shadow of Duque appeared. It took the small sun from Duque's main body and charged forward with the momentum of destroying everything indiscriminately. Boom! This was a violent blow that shook the entire Guardian Shrine area. In Duque's imagination, this blow should be able to cripple Vezix, if not kill him. But the effect was just passable. At the critical moment, the general used the 6 crab legs on his back to block in front of him. The explosion did hurt him, but it only blew away 3 crab legs. Many of the 2 crab pincers in front of him also exploded, revealing large chunks of muscle, but it was not fatal. F***CK. Duque was a little annoyed. He had almost emptied the magic in the 3-elemental magic circuit, but he was only slightly injured. This was not fun. At this moment, the first rune chain full of Titan runes suddenly flew over from the void. Someone sent me a pillow when I was feeling sleepy. Duque was amused. The first to arrive was the Storm Watcher Amaran. Half of his huge body was out of the general's domain. When he could reconnect with the wind elemental world, he immediately shot the rune chain at Duque. This thing was like a gas pipeline. With it, even if the general opened his domain, he could not stop the wind elements from flowing into Duque. If wireless transmission doesn't work, I'll use a direct connection. Chapter 1620. Du Bois was in a good mood. It was like a patient with severe internet addiction who was forced to work in a ravine with no signal. He had a top-of-the-line laptop but could only play Minesweeper. Then he managed to get on the internet. Although it was wired, he was touched. It was really indescribable. Duque was revived. It wasn't just full HP. That feeling was simply like a set of godly equipment on one's body. She felt so good about herself that she could totally trample on the Thunder Cliff. Oh no, it was trample on the Ice Throne. Her fists could distort the void, and she could drag Sargeras down from the throne with one hand and sit on it herself. He didn't take his medicine today, so he felt cute. God said that the wind will blow away all filth. At this moment, Dumuk seemed to be possessed by a godly huckster. The wind element that was slightly overflowing from his body was so strong that it actually caused a powerful tornado with just the aftershock. He pointed with his right hand, and 36 gusts of wind jumped out from between his fingers. They directly spread into curved wind blades with a radius of nearly 10 meters, wantonly cutting everything in their surroundings. This wasn't an attack directly aimed at General Vezix. This was using the wind element to destroy the surrounding biological tissues of Yogg-Saron that overlapped with this space. It clearly looked like the wind blades didn't hit anything, but there was a faint sound of silk tearing in the air. Then, a second rune chain flew through the air, every Titan rune blossoming bright red. This was a gift from the Flame Watcher, Koron. The injured Watcher's body stretched out of the general's territory, and only his intact arms stretched in. The rune chain formed by 1024 runes was like the skyline of the entire dark space, and it heavily stimulated Vezek's nerves. Roar, no matter how stupid the general was, he knew how terrible it was to let Duque obtain an unlimited supply of magic power. He suddenly pushed out a huge shadow energy ball from his pincers. Shadow Strike! Duque was stunned when he saw this thing, and then he laughed. Not to mention the power of this thing, just looking at its swaying slow attack speed, Duque almost burst out laughing. Moreover, as a veteran player who had experienced the Battle of Alder, as long as he did not take the first hit, this thing was a treasure. Other people were afraid of being hit by shadow-type attacks, but Duque was also afraid. But a low-level mystery was destined to be eaten by a higher-level mystery. Duque did something that no one present could believe. He rushed to block the huge shadow energy cluster before it hit Corellon's Flame Titan rune chain. Flash, using his face to block the attack. Even the 4 Great Guardians, including the 4 Great Guardians, felt that Duque had taken the wrong medicine. However, the expected shadow energy did not cause any damage to Duque. Instead, Duque's mysterious and strange prayer echoed in the room. Light comes from darkness, and from darkness comes light. These were the brainwashing words that Duque had used to convert Archeron's curse. General Faceless, who has long been sealed in his own world, would never hear about this Duque's glorious feat, but this did not prevent everyone from seeing that the general's shadow attack was ineffective. The shadow energy that Duque had actually converted was perhaps less than 20% of this energy cluster. Duque had mostly dispelled this energy. This time, the key point was deterrence. You can't use fire. You can't use shadow either. What other means do you have? Use them all. Duque said coldly and arrogantly. General W. Zak's eyes almost popped out. Now, Duque was clearly bullying him because he was not a magician, using the difference in elemental control to bully him. If there was anything that he could beat Duque in, it was close combat. Duque was a fragile pharaoh. How could he compete with a big guy like you in terms of wrist strength? You want to punch me and see who falls first? Don't be ridiculous. Originally, when Duque received Corellon's fire elemental supply, he wanted to directly give W. Zak's a fierce blow. But when Duque saw Corellon's half-dead appearance, he reduced his demand for fire elemental energy. Corellon, I'm not in a hurry. You should fix your body first. But the Flame Watcher finally nodded. Now that Duque had the upper hand, his demand for fire elemental energy was not so urgent. 3 seconds later, the Frost Watcher Turuan's ice elemental energy also came. The long ice elemental titan rune floated over like a beautiful staff. The glittering and translucent runes danced in the air, transmitting more ice elemental energy to Duque's body. This level of elemental purity. The second half of Duque's sentence was impressively, if only these guys were willing to work for my magic network. He did not wait for the slowest Earth Watcher Alcavan. After all, wind and earth elemental energy were not Duque's expertise. When the ice elemental energy once again filled every corner of the ice magic circuit in Duque's body, Duque brazenly made his move. With his left index finger, a huge, semi-illusory female figure suddenly appeared behind Duque. It was a very Greek-style virtual image of a goddess. Because there was no physical body, her face could not be seen clearly. Only a few lines made of ice elemental energy outlined a perfect woman's face. She carried a huge water bottle on her shoulder and slowly tipped it down. What gushed out of the bottle was almost the world's highest and purest ice elemental energy. God said, "The goddess of twilight will forgive you." Duque read out the name of the move in an extremely pretentious manner. But he was secretly pleased. *CK. I've wanted to do this for a long time, and I finally found the opportunity. Goddess of Twilight's forgiveness. In reality, when one reached the demigod realm, all magic attacks, unless they exceeded the scope of Duque's ability and understanding, were simply a matter of extracting elemental energy and shaping it. It did not matter what form it took. What mattered was the purity, density, and level of mystery of the elemental energy. Even Duque himself could not refine such an exaggerated amount of ice elemental energy. Since there was a watcher created by the Titan to help him, Duque took advantage of the situation. The ice elemental energy pouring out of the water bottle instantly turned into a sea of ice. It was flowing ice water as well as countless ice shards. Wherever the ice elemental energy covered, heaven and earth would be frozen, and all living things would die. The entire hall, be it the floor, the pillars, or the huge dome that was 100 meters tall, were all filled with ice. No, I am the servant of the great Yogg-Saron. Mere ice can't stump me. General Vezix was still struggling. More and more ice cubes were squeezing to his side. Although the ice cubes were exploding into ice slags under his terrifying brute force, in less than 1/10 of a second, the ice slags and liquid would be turned back into ice cubes driven by the freezing air of absolute zero, trying to confine his body. Chapter 1621. The giant pincer's movements were getting slower and slower. The general felt that he could no longer struggle. No, I am the servant of the great Yogg-Saron. I am invincible. General Vezix was still struggling, but everyone knew that his resistance was futile. Finally, Arcane, who was the slowest of them all, arrived at their destination. In the end, the earth element that Duque was most unfamiliar with came. It was a rune chain made of Titan runes that rose from the ground, transmitting an endless stream of elemental energy. Arcane, fire, and frost were the main ones, and holy, shadow, and nature, thunder, were the auxiliary ones. Of the 6 elements that Duque could manipulate, none were like the earth element. As the foundation of all things, the earth element was the least active. Although Duque could barely command these elements to move to a specific place, it was a terrible feeling. Duque was like a rich second generation who was used to driving a supercar that only needed 3 seconds to go from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour. How could he get used to driving a tractor, the kind of crappy tractor that was commonly seen in the countryside? There are some things that you just can't get used to, Duque complained. At the same time, he poured the earth element under Vezix's feet. The ground of the temple was surging violently. Large chunks of earth broke out of the floor tiles and formed something like a wave, swallowing the huge lower body of the general. Duque stretched out his hands and sent a telepathic message to the ice watcher, Turon. The latter immediately cooperated fully. Immediately after, a heavenly amount of ice elemental chi that could overturn rivers and seas appeared. Turon had used up all his strength. Thank you very much, Duque softly replied in the telepathic message. He held a tish in front of his chest with both hands, his left hand clockwise and his right hand counterclockwise, rubbing the handle of the staff. Along with Duque's movements, 2 huge ice elemental hands that were 10 meters long appeared in the middle of the ice layer. These 2 ice elemental hands were far denser than the other ice cubes. If these ice cubes formed by high-purity ice elements were at a level that could only be penetrated by icicles, then these 2 ice elemental hands were like diamonds in the mortal world. Crack, crisp and continuous sounds of cracking could be heard from the layer of ice. Accompanied by Duque's complex rubbing, the 2 large ice hands grabbed Vezix's shoulders and tore the general's body apart with the most primitive and violent absolute strength. Don't underestimate me, the general roared. Behind him, the tide of darkness surged wildly. This violent shadow energy gave him even greater strength. In the ice layer, it was as if 2 giants were wrestling. However, Duque's side was even more shameless. Under the continuous struggle of strength, the frost elements unrestrainedly squeezed in through every hole and crevice on the general's body, wantonly destroying the general's nerves, muscles, and blood vessels. Yogg-Saron's subordinates, faceless, have a strong vitality. However, the destructive power of the frost element was on a cellular level. The low temperature of absolute zero could easily freeze the water in the cells. When a unit of water is turned into ice, the ice occupies a larger volume. When the water in the cells turns into ice, the cells will burst from the inside out. At first, General Vezix didn't notice it, just as it was difficult for the human body to notice the withering of a certain hair. Gradually, he realized something was wrong. The numbness from his limbs made him instinctively feel that something was wrong. He wanted to seek energy and replenish his cells through the mark of the faceless, but bitterly found that within his range, there was only Duque. When all his means of attack were reduced to a joke, the result was already decided. "Ha!" Duque shouted. The general's carapace, which had been largely eroded by the frost elements, couldn't withstand the double effect of the cold and the tremendous force. Just as Duque shouted, the general's hammer-like pincers were the first to be torn off. Ah! Vezek's huge body struggled to shake. It was an instinctive struggle. No matter how he screamed, he couldn't stop the two large pincers from being dragged by the ice hands into this icy hell. Then there were the two thick legs. Any one of his legs could be used as the main beam of Agrimar's King's Valley Hall, but after his body was eroded by the frost and became cold and brittle, he couldn't resist the tremendous force from the ice hands. The frost magic circuit in Duque's body had been operating at its maximum speed. Even with his strength, it was a huge burden to use such a large amount of ultra-high purity frost elements. Now it all depended on who could hold on longer. Oomph! A cold snort. The ice hands exerted force again and tore off his left thigh. 3 seconds later, it was his right thigh. His tail, which was as thick as a drill, followed closely behind. Finally, it was Vezek's ridiculous wings, which looked like 6 crab legs. When Duque finished all this, the ultra-high-density condensed frost elements from the floor to the dome in the hall suddenly exploded. Bang! Crisply and neatly, all the ice turned into crystal dust and was expelled by the evil energy that enveloped the entire Otter Guardian Temple. Of course, everything was settled. Awoo, General Vezek, who had been insufferably arrogant a few minutes ago, now looked extremely miserable. Apart from his head, all his limbs had been torn off and turned into a human stick. Oh no, a lobster stick. At this time, even the shell of his body had been completely destroyed by the frost elements, leaving only a ball of white, tender, and bloodshot flesh. He looked like a fat worm. As the largest hole in his body, his facial features had been thoroughly invaded by the frost elements and were completely distorted. Why do I suddenly feel that this guy looks a little interesting? Kolalon, who had been severely injured, was the most gloating. With heavy footsteps, the 4 Great Watchers surrounded him. Archivon asked, "What do we do now?" "Before we take care of the other 3 guardians, I'll leave this place to you too," Duke ordered. "No problem. Everything is for the Creator." Archivon pounded his chest. Duque glanced at General Vezek, who was wriggling on the ground like a worm. As for him, if his limbs grow out again, pull them out. But we can't let him die prematurely. Happy to help. Kolalon grinned hideously. He stretched out his big hand that was covered in blazing flames and touched it. He tore off a large piece of flesh that was growing rapidly on the general's arm and completely destroyed it. Chapter 1622. I'm just afraid that he'll use other means to inform Yogg-Saron. Turawan added. It's fine. Duque chuckled. I'll leave this to you, Isra. A soft voice came from the void. If Isra, the dragon aspect who controlled the Emerald Dream, was allowed to suppress Yogg-Saron, something might really happen. But she was more than enough to suppress an ancient god servant and prevent it from sending out a warning signal without participating in the battle. Phew. Letting out a long sigh of relief, Duque finally had the time to sense the situation on the other battlefields. Queen Sylvan's battle against the Guardian of Life, Freya, had just reached the point of killing the first Elder Ancient Tree. After carefully sensing the elemental reserves of both sides, Duque was relieved. On the other side, in the severe winter hall, Onyxia and Vashj were up against Hodir, the guardian of the Temple of Winter. There was not much suspense in the battle here. Onyxia was not weak to begin with, and with Vashj, who was also a demigod, with 2 bosses ganging up on 1 boss, Duque felt a little embarrassed. Once upon a time, Duque had also been worried about the cooperation between these 2. After all, they were used to working alone. One was a princess, and the other was a Naga queen. They were proud from the bottom of their hearts. Apart from Duque, they were not convinced by anyone. At least he had caught Vashj to tame the dragon together, and after teasing the Naga a few times, he had finally subdued them. At least they would not undermine each other. In the image sent by the magician's eyes, Onyxia was the main attacker, and Vashj was the support. If Hodier tried to freeze something, Vashj would remove the seal and use lightning arrows to restrain Hodier. The scales of victory were slowly tipping in the favor of the two women. What they really had to pay attention to was Mimiron. Because they could not wait for Duque, the Alliance of Heroes had already launched an attack on Mimiron on time, according to their previous agreement. From the Temple of Invention, also known as the Temple of Creation, the great inventor Mimiron still brought his black technology equipment and weapons. In terms of his main body's battle prowess, Mimiron was just trash. Miss Sally Whitemane, who was a priest, could teach him a lesson with a hammer. Unfortunately, his underlings were as numerous as the hairs on an ox. Moreover, he had several great killing weapons. First was the heavy infantry tank, the Flaming Beast 2 Malawian Quachas. This thing's appearance was a smaller version of the Flaming Beast that Duque and the others had fought before at the city wall area. The form was the same, but the inside had been changed by Mimiron. The equipment and skills were completely different. Moreover, because this was the interior of the temple, the previous vehicles could not enter. Now, the Alliance experts had no choice but to use their physical bodies to deal with this smaller steel beast. When Duke looked over, he saw that Gavin Rad's hair had been set on fire. He had no choice but to cut off his hair and cut off the black hair on his head with a sword. It looked like it was heading towards the Mediterranean Sea. Duque smiled bitterly and held his forehead. What the hell? I've been tricked by a little less spoiler? To avoid arousing suspicion, Duque did not reveal the detailed strategy of Oder to the Alliance this time. All the inside information was leaked by Torim, the traitor. After Loken was killed in Odin and Tyr's absence, as one of the 4 remaining guardians, Torim knew everything about Oder. But that was based on all the known information. Before Torim left Oder, Torim told him everything he knew without holding anything back. Torim didn't know anything about Yogg-Saron. Similarly, he didn't know what Mimiron, who was always tinkering with new inventions, had. The Alliance's hero group encountered Mimiron without any information, and then they were tricked by the shrunken mechanical tank that looked the same. Those are landmines. Don't step on them. Bulang yelled. There were always people who made mistakes in a hurry, such as Riadaline. She should have been fine when she followed Kalia, who had tiptoed through 2 landmines. Unfortunately, that was a high-sensitivity landmine. The Blood Elf Paladin didn't touch the landmine, but her shield swung over it and detonated the landmine. Bang! There was a loud bang, and a flame shot up into the sky within a 10-yard radius. If she hadn't activated the Holy Shield spell at the critical moment and forcefully entered an invincible state with super-dense holy light, she would have broken a leg. The next second, seeing dozens of missiles flying in crooked trajectories fly up from the back of Little One's flame behemoth, Bulang's face turned green again. The rockets are coming, dodge. Perhaps because the rockets were too focused on accuracy, they weren't fast. If the Alliance powerhouses wanted to dodge, they could basically dodge them. However, every time a rocket hit the metal floor, it would definitely ignite a large area. This was a gasoline rocket bomb. If you were even a little bit touched by this thing, you would become a man on fire. Without enough holy light or natural spells to heal you, you would turn from a man on fire to someone familiar. Yes, the kind that smelled like barbecued meat. Unfortunately, when the entire flame chariot lit up with lightning and dense crackling sounds of electricity rang out, everyone's formation was disrupted again. Get out of the way. This time, it was Theon who shouted. Because he had accidentally gotten too close, even he had almost been hit. This kind of ultra-high voltage electricity sputtering would kill someone in an instant if they were touched. At this moment, Mimiron's Hall of Inventions was filled with fire, and there were fewer and fewer places for people to stand. Everyone was forced into chaos by the rampaging flame behemoth, and it could be said that it was a mess. It was in this situation that Magni saw in despair that the thick main cannon on top of the flame behemoth was aimed at him. The Shorty King no longer cared about his demeanor and shouted shamelessly, "I don't have Avid anymore. Protect me or we will all die together." That's right, in the previous wave of attacks, Magni had almost single-handedly taken the flame behemoth's plasma cannon head-on. Unlike traditional cannons, this black technology cannon that should not have appeared in Azeroth was completely like a laser cannon. Whether or not it was plasma remained to be seen. In any case, Magni, who could take the full attack of Balrog Ragnaros, knew that under normal conditions he would not be able to take this kind of concentrated attack that lasted for 7 seconds. It was not that he did not try to dodge, but he could not. Instead, there was one time when Chandris attacked too fiercely and attracted the main cannon's attack. Even a sentinel leader like Chandris, who was favored by the moon goddess, almost fell. In order to save her adopted daughter, Tyrande used up a precious god-given protective item. This time, when he saw the plasma cannon's light pouncing towards him and filling his entire field of vision, Magni shouted, "Duke? You bastard, why are you still not coming?" Chapter 1623. It was better to be late than never. Just as Magni was about to raise his shield to take the ion cannon blast head-on with his short stature, a beautiful ice prism appeared in front of him. The extremely flat mirror surface was spotless, and the clarity of the mirror made one wonder if it was glass or ice. The extreme cold aura emanating from it let Magni know that this mirror was definitely a frost elemental creation. The ice prism formed a 45-degree angle with Magni and blocked in front of him. Sizzle, a strange sound. What was even stranger was that the main cannon attack that had just caused Magni so much pain was reflected. A 45-degree angle of entry and a 45-degree angle of exit. The gorgeous ion cannon attack flew out at a perfect right angle in front of the Short King. A lifelike image of Magni appeared in front of the mirror, and then made an exaggerated fall to the ground. He let out a pitiful cry like a duck being butchered alive, and fell dead on the ground. Magni, who was behind the ice prism, was dumbfounded. It was too lifelike. If this illusion wasn't exactly the same as him, and if it was his brother Muradin or Bu Lang, Magni might have believed it himself. Alright, regardless of whether Magni believed it or not, the giant flaming beast two Malawian Quatches believed it. Seeing that the human figure in the light of the ion cannon had been completely disintegrated and that the giant beast's battle result evaluation system showed target destroyed, Mimran casually stopped the energy output of the main cannon. Although he didn't think much of this short mortal who could enlarge his body, the vague sense of threat in his heart made him instinctively try to preserve the giant flaming beast's energy. In the next instant, a bright red outline of a human appeared on the screen in Mimran's control room. The giant beast enemy tracking system's warning sounded. High-energy life form detected. High-energy enemy target detected. Target's combat level is assessed to be demigod. Rating, highly dangerous. Huh. Mimran's mechanical eyes, which were the size of goose eggs, instantly focused and narrowed down. Isn't it here now? Anyone would be shocked to hear a voice suddenly reverberating in their ears. But hearing that familiar and lazy tone, everyone calmed down as if they had taken a tranquilizer. Better late than never. Is it done over there? Magni asked. General Vezek's mutant lobster? Duque smirked. Sorry, I sliced him into lobster balls. With a wave of his hand, Duque displayed a three-dimensional projection. In the picture, a big meatball with only a head left was twitching and screaming, because the newly grown limbs would be torn off and destroyed by the bulky guardians. Having strong regenerative abilities was originally a good thing, but in this situation, it was a hellish torture. Mimran's mechanical eyes flashed, and no one knew what he was thinking. He raised his mechanical arm and pressed a green button. Poof. The continuous sounds of the lids being opened could be heard. The back half of the Flaming Beast Mk2's top opened row after row of lids, revealing the spherical red missile heads inside. Duque chuckled. Damn it. Do you really think I've never seen a missile cabin before? Due to the limitations of the era, Even someone as sharp as Magni didn't know what those missiles were. Perhaps to the Shorty King, they were a new type of cannonball. As a transmigrator, Du could be influenced by a series of giant robot animations such as Transdimensional Fortress and Gundam. Plus, he had been watching military channels for a long time. If he couldn't even recognize this, then he could drown himself with a bucket of tofu. Mimiron, show me something new. This stuff of yours isn't enough. Duque stretched out his right hand and snapped his fingers. In an instant, over 100 magicians' hands appeared in the air above the entire workshop. The might of the 100-armed Reaper had reappeared. Bush, bush, bush. The pure arcane missiles hit the warhead before Mimiron's missiles even left the cabin. Mimiron was indeed a genius. But no matter how powerful a genius was, he would not consider many details without going through the test of battle. For example, the safety of the missiles. What if the warhead with the firing mechanism was accidentally attacked prematurely? Bang, bang, bang. Continuous sounds of explosions rang out on top of the raging flame beast's head. One had to know that Mimiron's flaming beast used a napalm rocket bomb. Once the warhead was destroyed, the gasoline inside would instantly splatter everywhere. Not only did it splatter onto the flaming beast's head, but it also seeped into the missile tube. The flaming beast was just a machine, not a fire elemental creature. Whether it was the one guarding the city wall or this shrunken, improved model, they were not immune to fire. Duque destroying the rocket bomb prematurely was no doubt Mimiron had shot himself in the foot. This feeling was definitely exhilarating. In an instant, the Alliance's powerful fighters who had scattered to avoid the rocket bombs all let out strange cheers. Originally, Mimiron still had the landmines, but he hesitated at the last moment. If the rocket bomb could not be launched, then the slower landmines would naturally be intercepted before they could even land on the ground. Mimiron grabbed the steering wheel with both hands and stepped on the accelerator, directly driving the flaming beast towards Duque. At the same time, an intense bolt of lightning was brewing above the flaming beast. The corner of Duque's mouth curved into a mocking smile. Mimiron, if I use magic to defeat you, I'm sure you won't be satisfied. Fine, come on. You attack me with science, I'll defend against you with science. There was no wind elemental energy. What condensed on the flaming behemoth 2 Malawian kwaches was pure electrical energy produced by the battery and generator. Beep. On Duque's retina, the system showed that the voltage had reached 10,000 volts. This was a very impressive number. Even if Duque had Gerban's gnome technicians and inventors research electromagnetic coils to generate electricity, there was still a long way to go before high-voltage power transmission. Duque did not know if Mimiron had any talent in other areas, but at least in the field of electricity, Mimiron had won Duque's favor. Damn, if Mimiron hadn't used Titan runes to generate electricity, then he would have made a killing this time. Duque was even more determined to kidnap Mimiron. Duque shouted, "Treasures of God!" 36 epic-grade long-handled weapons were thrown out by Duque from his storage bag and stabbed into the hard steel ground with Hand of Magic. Duque waved his hand. Come. Chapter 1624. Don't show off. Show off and get struck by lightning. Duque had grown up listening to this saying. However, if a demigod with wind and lightning attributes were to be struck to death by lightning, it would be an absolute disgrace. As for the flame beast's high-voltage external armor, Duque could actually take it head-on. The reason why Duque had set up 36 dung forks, the imitation version of the Shadow Strike, personally made by the #1 blacksmith in the Alliance, Magni Bronzebeard, and set up a lightning rod array, was to seduce it. Come on. The story of lightning rods and lightning rods could go on for an entire day. However, the conductivity of the 36 dung forks was absolutely unbeatable. 10,000 volts of high-voltage electricity was almost instantly directed away. The floor was made of steel, and it was superconductive. In addition, Duze had secretly manipulated the electricity and directed it back in the direction of the flame beast. Immediately, the flame beast fell for it. BZBB, In every corner of the giant mechanical tank, there were sparks flying everywhere, and billowing black smoke was also coming out. Before Duque had arrived, the Flame Beast Mk2 had already suffered a lot of damage from the Alliance's powerhouses. Duque's arrival was the last straw that broke the camel's back. The loud bangs signified that this giant toy that belonged exclusively to Mimiron was about to be destroyed. Logically speaking, the next one to appear was the VX-001 laser cannon. None of the Alliance's powerhouses knew about this move of Mimiron's, but Duque knew. In the original history, the Allied forces that had broken into this place had never seen such a novel and unimaginable thing, so they were all stunned. No one could predict how much the Flame Beast would be smashed to destroy it, so they could only attack with all their might. In the end, when Mimiron gave up on the Flame Beast and entered the laser cannon instead, everyone was a step too slow. Only Duque knew how fragile Mimiron was in the transition period between one mechanical creation and another. Duque seemed to be very excited as he continued to bombard the flame behemoth with fireballs. However, in his field of vision, Duque stared at the HP of the flame behemoth determined by the system. When the HP number hit 0, Duque moved. He activated Flash and instantly disappeared from everyone's sight. At this moment, no one but Duque noticed that a small round hatch had opened on the top of the blazing beast, and Mimiron, who was carrying a jetpack, ejected himself out. Any modern fighter jet on Earth has the ability to eject and so on. This was because the training fee for fighter pilots was extremely expensive. Even if a country was crippled, it would be extremely painful. Therefore, the ejection device was used to save the lives of the pilots in the crashed fighter. Mimiron's jetpack was an ejection device that transcended the Azeroth era. Unfortunately, he was caught by Duque almost as soon as he left the protection of the giant flaming beast. A huge arcane energy palm grabbed him with one hand. "Let me go! You barbarian! Let me go, The scene instantly quietened down. Without Mimiron as the mainframe, the various automatic defense systems that were still operating on the field all stopped working. The flame behemoth had already started to explode, and the laser cannons had yet to rise. It seemed like there was no way to fight anymore. Although everyone knew that this dwarf who looked like a dwarf but was actually made of metal was the guardian of the divine temple of creation, Mimiron. After all, this guy had mocked everyone before opening the portal, but it felt like this guy still had a lot of tricks up his sleeves. How did he get caught by Duque just like that? Do you know who you've caught? I am the greatest inventor, Mimiron, the faithful servant of the supreme god Yogg-Saron. Duque forced a smile and stretched the muscles on his face. Fool, stop shouting. You're being controlled. However, it was Torim who asked us to come to Oder to save the three of you and deal with that guy Yogg-Saron. Duque didn't waste any time and directly let the large hand of magic grab Mimiron's metal head, which was obviously disproportionate to his body and looked like it had eaten Sanlu milk powder, and smash it hard on the metal floor. Let me tell you, The huge arcane palm directly made Mimiron kneel in front of Duque in an oars posture, using his head to make intimate contact with the floor. I am a magnificent and sonorous voice. Don't smash, the data will be lost. Who told you to believe in a cult? Just come under the command of the Duque Divine Church. Just like that, Duque put his hands behind his back and quietly pretended to be cool as he watched the dignified Titan Guardian kowtow to him. Well, of course, in the name of waking Mimiron up. On the side, the Alliance's powerhouses all looked at Duque, dumbfounded. They knew that Duque was awesome, but they didn't know that Duque was already this awesome. The Titan Guardian who had forced them into such a mess was captured and beaten up just like that? This big ceremony of 3 kneeling and 9 kowtows seemed to be even more impressive than that of his own subjects. Magni stroked his big beard and muttered to himself, "Hey, third brother, should we change the etiquette of meeting the king in the future to kowtowing like this? It looks pretty cool." Bu Lang looked at his big brother who was occasionally going off the rails and rolled his eyes. "Big brother, we dwarves don't have that kind of patience. Do you believe that if you issue a new order here, the dwarves below will shoot you?" "They can't kill me," Magni shrieked. Then at least it feels good. Alright, you're right. While the unruly fellow was teasing them, Mimiron seemed to have sobered up. Enough. Enough. Stop smashing. I remember now. I'm the Titan Guardian, not that damn prisoner's servant. Damn it. Stop. Are you here to help or not? Mimiron shouted as he waved his arms and legs. Duque looked at Mimiron, whose metal head had caved in from the kowtows, and finally didn't have the nerve to continue with his underhanded attacks. You're really awake? Don't tell me you've been brainwashed and are pretending to be awake? Duque used the magician's hand to lift the little Mimiron. Bullsh*T. Damn native. If I didn't have to get Odor back first, I would have killed you. Damn Loken, damn liar. Mimiron waved his arms and legs. Duque finally put Mimiron down. You said that Torim asked you to come here? I have the memory of you dealing with my flaming beasts. I know that you should be going against Yogg-Saron, but I want to confirm it. As Mimiron spoke, he took out something that looked like a welding torch from somewhere and burned his head. Under everyone's gaze, the caved-in head actually started to recover. He gave this to me. Duque handed over a Titan mark. The Guardians had a special way of communicating with each other that outsiders definitely wouldn't understand. Mimiron rolled his eyes at Duque. Alright, I trust you. I don't know what's going on with the other Guardians, but I'm very angry now. Do you want to come with me to settle the score with Yogg-Saron? You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.